June 6, 1944, Normandy, France. The Sherman tank, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Iron Bob Harrington, rumbled forward through the Norman countryside, its tracks grinding against the damp soil. At 58 years of age, Harrington's weathered face bore the lines of a man who had witnessed the evolution of modern warfare firsthand. 26 years earlier, he had commanded one of the first American tanks in the muddy fields of World War I. Now, as the commander of the 33rd Armored Battalion, he was once again leading men into the heart of Europe. The morning sun reflected off the Sherman's olive-drab hull as it crested a small ridge. Harrington stood in the commander's hatch, binoculars raised to his eyes, scanning the rolling terrain ahead. The picturesque Norman landscape, with its ancient hedgerows and pastoral fields, had been transformed into a deadly chessboard where armored behemoths hunted one another through fog and fire. "Radio check, all units." Harrington's voice was steady, betraying none of the concern that had been growing inside him over the past weeks. "Thunder 6 to all Thunder elements. Report status." The responses came in one by one. 5 Sherman tanks, spread out in a wedge formation, each commanded by men Harrington had personally selected and trained. Good men, brave men, men he was increasingly afraid he was leading to their deaths. "Thunder 2 operational. Thunder 3 ready. Thunder 4 all systems go. Thunder 5 standing by." The final voice that crackled over the radio belonged to his son. "Thunder 7 ready and waiting, Colonel." Captain Michael Harrington's voice carried the same confident tone as his father's, though it lacked the deeper resonance that came with age and experience. At 28, the younger Harrington commanded his own tank platoon within the battalion, continuing a family tradition that stretched back to the Civil War, when the first Harrington had ridden with the Union cavalry. Robert Harrington allowed himself a moment of paternal pride, but it quickly gave way to a deeper, more troubling emotion. He knew something his son did not, something he couldn't share with any of the men under his command, something that had been keeping him awake at night since they'd landed on the beaches of Normandy. Their tanks were not good enough. Intelligence reports had been filtering in for months about the German Tiger and Panther tanks. Reports detailing armor so thick that standard American tank shells bounced off harmlessly. Reports of German guns that could destroy a Sherman from over a mile away, well beyond the effective range of American 75mm guns. Reports that high command had dismissed, downplayed, or simply ignored. "Maintain formation," Harrington ordered. "We'll proceed to Point Baker and establish defensive positions along the ridge overlooking Harrington. Keep your eyes sharp for enemy armor." As the column of Shermans moved forward, Harrington closed his eyes briefly, feeling the familiar vibration of the machine beneath him. The Sherman was a reliable tank in many ways, easy to produce, mechanically dependable, and maneuverable. But against the German heavies, it was outclassed in almost every category that mattered in tank versus tank combat. The U.S. Army had chosen quantity over quality, mass production over technological superiority. It was a strategic decision that made sense on paper, in the planning rooms far from the front lines. Build more tanks, overwhelm the enemy with sheer numbers. But Harrington had seen the burned-out hulls of Sherman tanks, had smelled the sickening odor of burned flesh and fuel, had written too many letters to parents and wives. A memory surfaced unbidden. A cold winter evening in 1918, standing beside Lieutenant General John J. Pershing as they inspected one of the first American tanks to reach the front. Pershing had placed a hand on the armor and said something Harrington had never forgotten. "Remember, son, in war the technology changes, but the blood stays the same." The radio crackled again. "Thunder 6, this is Thunder 7. We've got movement at our 3 o'clock, approximately 800 yards. Harrington snapped back to the present, raising his binoculars. Through the magnified lenses, he saw what his son had spotted. The unmistakable silhouette of a German Panzer IV moving along the edge of a distant tree line, its long-barreled 75mm gun sweeping back and forth like the snout of a predator catching a scent. "All units, hold position," he commanded. "Let them come closer." The next 30 seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Harrington watched as the German tank, apparently unaware of the American presence, continued its patrol. Then at the critical moment, Harrington gave the order. "All units, fire at will." 5 Sherman tanks fired almost simultaneously. The sound was deafening, a thunderous chorus of industrial destruction. 3 shells missed, disappearing into the trees beyond the target. One struck the ground just short, throwing up a geyser of dirt and stone. But the fifth shell, fired by Thunder 3, hit the Panzer IV squarely in the side armor, igniting its ammunition in a catastrophic explosion that sent its turret spinning into the air like a child's toy. A cheer erupted over the radio. Harrington didn't join in. He knew the difference between a Panzer IV and a Tiger. This had been the former, vulnerable, and outclassed by the newer German heavy tanks. It was a victory, yes, but perhaps one that would give his men a false sense of confidence. Good shooting, Thunder 3, he acknowledged. All units, resume advance to Point Baker. Stay alert. As they continued forward, Sergeant Jenkins, Harrington's gunner, spoke up from below. That was a clean shot, sir. Maybe those intelligence reports about the German tanks were exaggerated. Harrington didn't respond immediately. Jenkins was a good soldier, one of his best. But like most of the men, he hadn't seen what Harrington had seen during a classified briefing 3 weeks earlier. Aerial photographs of German Tiger tanks in a staging area near Caen. Detailed schematics showing armor thickness almost double that of the Sherman. Performance reports indicating superior optics, better stabilization, and a gun that could penetrate a Sherman's front armor at over 1,000 yards. Let's hope so, Jenkins, he finally said. Let's hope so. By midday, the battalion had reached Point Baker, a strategic ridge that offered excellent visibility of the surrounding countryside and the roads leading to Harrington. Harrington ordered his tanks into hold-down positions, using the natural contour of the ridge to conceal the bulk of their armor, while keeping their guns able to bear on any approaching enemy. He had just finished inspecting the positions when his radio operator called him over. Colonel, Captain Harrington is requesting permission to take his platoon on a reconnaissance patrol toward the south. Says he spotted what might be vehicle movement near the village. Harrington frowned. Standard doctrine would support such a patrol. Aggressive reconnaissance was a cornerstone of American armored tactics, a way to locate the enemy and bring overwhelming firepower to bear. But something about the situation felt wrong. A nagging intuition born from decades of military experience. Denied, he said after a moment's consideration. Tell him to maintain position and continue observation. He could almost feel his son's disappointment through the radio when the message was relayed. But Michael was a good officer. He acknowledged the order without question. As the afternoon wore on, Harrington retreated to the command half-track, where he spread out maps of the area and studied intelligence reports. There had been rumors of a panzer division operating in this sector, but their exact position and strength remained unknown. The lack of solid intelligence was troubling. Sergeant Miller, his operations officer, joined him. Sir, the men are wondering why we're holding position. Word from other battalions is that they're pushing hard towards St. Lo. Harrington gestured to the map. Look at these hedgerows, Miller. Perfect cover for anti-tank guns. And these narrow roads flanked by embankments. If there are Panthers or Tigers out there, they could engage us at range while we'd be restricted to these channels of movement. Miller studied the map. So what's our play, sir? We wait, Harrington replied. We observe. We let the enemy come to us where we can choose the ground and the moment. Miller looked surprised. This wasn't the aggressive, forward-moving doctrine that had been drilled into them. But he nodded respectfully. Yes, sir. After Miller left, Harrington pulled a worn journal from his jacket pocket. He'd been making notes, compiling observations about tank engagements since the North African campaign. Patterns were emerging, patterns that contradicted established doctrine. The Shermans that survived encounters with German heavy tanks weren't the ones that charged forward, guns blazing as the manuals instructed. They were the ones that used terrain, that engaged from concealed positions, that struck from the flanks, and withdrew before the enemy could respond effectively. They were, Harrington realized with a start, using the same tactics that the most successful German tank commanders had employed in 1940 during the fall of France. Not a war of charging cavalry, but of ambush and maneuver. At dusk, Harrington called a meeting of his tank commanders. They gathered in a bombed-out farmhouse that was serving as a temporary command post, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a kerosene lamp. Among them was Michael, who stood slightly apart from the others, his expression a careful mask of professionalism that didn't quite hide his frustration at being held back earlier. Gentlemen, Harrington began, I know some of you are questioning why we've been holding position while other battalions advance. I want to be clear about something. Our mission is not just to take ground, it's to preserve our fighting strength for the battles that matter most. He unfolded a map on the table. Intelligence suggests a substantial German armored presence in this area. Not just Panzer IVs, but Tigers and Panthers. We need to understand something about these vehicles. Harrington drew a line on the map. This is the effective range of our 75 millimeter gun against a tiger's frontal armor. About 500 yards, and even then we need to hit a vulnerable spot. He drew another line, much longer. This is the range at which their 88 millimeter gun can penetrate our armor, over 1,500 yards. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sir, one of the lieutenants spoke up, are you saying we can't engage these tanks head on? That's exactly what I'm saying, Lieutenant. If we fight according to current doctrine, we'll be sending our men to slaughter. Harrington looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes in turn. But that doesn't mean we can't fight. It means we need to fight smarter. He began outlining a modified approach, using terrain for concealment, moving in ways that forced German tanks to expose their more vulnerable side and rear armor, coordinating with artillery to force enemy tanks into disadvantageous positions. This isn't in the manual, he concluded, but neither are the tanks we're facing. We adapt or we die. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Michael spoke. With respect, sir, this contradicts everything we have been trained to do. The whole point of our armored doctrine is to concentrate force and punch through enemy lines. And that works, Harrington replied. When we have technological parity or superiority, we don't have that now. He looked directly at his son. I'm not asking you to like it, Captain. I'm ordering you to keep your men alive long enough to win this war. Later that night, as Harrington sat alone in the command half-track, the sound of distant artillery providing a rhythmic backdrop to his thoughts, there was a knock on the door. Michael entered without waiting for a response. Permission to speak freely, sir? Harrington nodded, setting aside the report he'd been reading. The men are talking, Michael said, his voice low but intense. They're saying you've lost your nerve, that you're being overly cautious because of your age. The words stung, but Harrington kept his expression neutral. And what do you think, Captain? Michael hesitated. I think you're holding something back. Something you're not telling us. Harrington considered his options carefully. There was the truth, classified and grim, about just how outmatched their tanks were. There was the official line, optimistic and sanitized. And then there was what his son needed to hear, as both an officer and a son. 3 weeks ago, Harrington finally said, I was shown combat footage from the Eastern Front, a battalion of Soviet T-34s, technically superior to our Shermans in several respects, attempted to break through a German line held by just 5 Tigers. Within minutes, 27 Tifus were burning wrecks. Not a single Tiger was lost. Michael's face paled slightly. Why hasn't this information been shared with combat commanders? Politics, production commitments, morale considerations. Harrington shrugged. The decision was made at levels far above mine. So we're being sent against superior tanks without being told the truth? Now you understand my caution. Harrington leaned forward. Michael, I've commanded tanks in 2 world wars. I've seen technology evolve, tactics change. But one constant remains. A commander's first duty is to accomplish the mission while preserving the lives of his men. Sometimes that means fighting in ways the manual doesn't cover. Michael was silent for a long moment, processing what he'd heard. Finally, he nodded. I trust your judgment, sir, and I'll support your orders. He paused. But the men need to understand why we're operating this way. They need something more than just orders. You're right, Harrington agreed. Tomorrow, I'll address the entire battalion, show them what we're up against and how we're going to fight on our terms, not the enemy's. As Michael turned to leave, Harrington added, and son, thank you for coming to me directly with this. Michael gave a slight smile. That's what you taught me, sir. Address problems at their source. The next morning, Harrington gathered the men of the 33rd Armored Battalion. Standing atop his command vehicle, his weathered face solemn in the early light, he looked out at the assembled soldiers. Young faces mostly, some barely out of their teens, all looking up at him with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. Men of the 33rd, he began, his voice carrying across the morning air. I owe you the truth about what we're facing. What followed was an honest assessment of the German armor they would encounter, the limitations of their own equipment, and the tactics they would need to employ to succeed. He didn't sugarcoat the challenges, but neither did he indulge in defeatism. Instead, he emphasized American ingenuity, adaptability, and teamwork. The Germans have built tanks with thicker armor and bigger guns, he concluded. But we have something they lack. We have men who can think for themselves, who can adapt when plans go awry, who fight not for a dictator, but for each other and for the freedom of people everywhere. That's how we'll win this war. Not by blindly following a doctrine written before these new threats emerged, but by using our greatest weapon, the American spirit of innovation. The speech seemed to have its intended effect. Harrington could see resolve hardening in the faces before him. Even those who had been most skeptical appeared thoughtful rather than dismissive. As the men dispersed to their vehicles, Michael approached him. "Good words, sir. I think they understand now." Harrington nodded, but his attention was drawn to the horizon where dark clouds were gathering. "Weather's changing," he remarked. "Visibility will be reduced. That works in our favor." Michael followed his gaze. "You think today's the day we'll see action?" "Intelligence reports suggest increased German movement in this sector. Yes, I think today we'll get our first real test." Harrington placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Remember what I said about using terrain and coordinated movement. Don't let your tanks become isolated." "I won't, sir." Michael straightened, professional once more. "Thunder 7 will be ready." The rain began shortly after noon, a steady downpour that turned the Norman soil to mud and reduced visibility to a few hundred yards. Harrington had repositioned his tanks, spreading them out along the ridge in concealed positions, each with overlapping fields of fire. If German armor approached, they would face coordinated fire from multiple angles. The waiting was always the hardest part. Hours passed with nothing but the drumming of rain on metal and the occasional burst of static from the radio. Some of the men dozed at their stations. Others cleaned weapons that were already spotless, a nervous habit of soldiers throughout history. Then, at 15:37 hours according to Harrington's watch, the radio crackled to life. "Thunder 6, this is Thunder 4. Contact. German armor bearing 090, range approximately 1,000 yards. Count 3, no, 4 vehicles. Panther tanks moving west along the main road." Harrington was instantly alert, moving to his observation position and raising his binoculars. Through the rain, he could just make out the distinctive silhouettes of Panther tanks, their long-barreled 75mm guns protruding like spears as they advanced cautiously down the road that ran perpendicular to the American position. "All units, maintain position," he ordered. "Do not engage until they're within 600 yards. I say again, hold fire until 600 yards." This was contrary to every instinct the tankers had been trained to follow. Standard doctrine called for immediate engagement of enemy armor. But Harrington knew that at this range, their shells would likely bounce harmlessly off the Panthers' frontal armor. They needed the Germans closer, preferably exposing their side armor as they passed along the road. Minutes crawled by as the German tanks advanced slowly through the rain. Harrington could feel the tension building among his men, the growing urge to open fire. But his commanders held discipline, trusting in his judgment despite their training. The lead Panther was just crossing the 600-yard line when something unexpected happened. Instead of continuing along the road, it turned, orienting its front armor and gun directly toward the American position on the ridge. "They've spotted us," Harrington realized with a chill, "or they suspect we're here." The German commander was good, positioning his tanks to present their strongest armor toward the likely threat. It was a textbook maneuver, one that would neutralize much of the advantage Harrington had been counting on. He made a split-second decision. Thunder 3 and 5, fire smoke shells, then displace to secondary positions. All other units hold fire. The 2 designated tanks fired, sending smoke shells that burst in front of the German position, creating a temporary visual barrier. In the confusion, the 2 Sherman tanks quickly backed away from their positions and began moving to pre-designated secondary locations. The Germans responded predictably, firing several shells into the area where the smoke had originated. But by then, the 2 Shermans were already elsewhere. "Thunder 7, Harrington called to his son's tank. "Execute flanking maneuver Delta. Take your platoons south along the ridge, then swing east. Hit them from the side while they're focused on our position." "Executing Delta now," came the crisp reply. Michael's platoon of 3 Shermans began moving quietly along the reverse slope of the ridge, hidden from the German tanks by the elevated terrain. Their objective was to circle around and strike the Panthers from an unexpected angle. The next 10 minutes were among the longest of Harrington's life. The German tanks had halted at the edge of the smoke, their commanders no doubt trying to determine the strength and exact position of the American forces. Occasionally, they would fire a shell toward the ridge, but these were ranging shots, attempts to provoke a response that would reveal the American positions. Harrington remained silent, watching through his binoculars, waiting for the moment when Michael's platoon would be in position. The rain had intensified, further reducing visibility, which worked to their advantage. Finally, his radio crackled. "Thunder 6, this is Thunder 7, in position awaiting your order." Harrington took a deep breath. "Thunder 7, you are clear to engage. All remaining units, prepare to fire on my command." What followed was a masterclass in coordinated armor tactics. Michael's platoon opened fire from the Panthers' right flank, striking the German tanks where their armor was thinnest. Simultaneously, Harrington ordered the remaining Shermans on the ridge to target the now exposed rear armor of the Panthers as they turned to face this new threat. The result was devastating. Within minutes, 3 of the 4 Panthers were ablaze, black smoke rising to mix with the gray rain clouds above. The 4th was attempting to withdraw, its turret mechanism apparently damaged, the gun locked facing forward. "Thunder 4, finish it," Harrington ordered. The Sherman designated as Thunder 4 fired once. The shell struck the retreating Panther in the engine compartment, igniting its fuel and sending flames shooting skyward. "All units, hold position and scan for additional threats," Harrington commanded, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Thunder 7, well executed, return to primary positions." As Michael's platoon made its way back to the ridge, Harrington allowed himself a moment of pride. They had just destroyed 4 Panther tanks without a single American casualty. It was a textbook demonstration of his modified tactics, using terrain, coordinated movement, and targeted strikes at vulnerable points. But he knew this was just the beginning. The Germans would adapt, as they always did. And somewhere out there, Tiger tanks were waiting, even more formidable than the Panthers they had just defeated. That evening, as the battalion regrouped and prepared defensive positions for the night, word of their success had already spread to neighboring units. A jeep arrived from division headquarters, carrying Colonel William Marshall, the division operations officer. Marshall found Harrington in the command tent, reviewing after-action reports from the engagement. "Bob," Marshall greeted him with a firm handshake, "heard you took out 4 Panthers today without losing a single tank. The general is very interested in how you managed that." Harrington gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Bill. It's a long story." For the next hour, Harrington explained his approach: the modified tactics, the emphasis on flanking maneuvers, the discipline of holding fire until targets were vulnerable. Marshall listened attentively, occasionally making notes. "This is unorthodox," he finally said. "Goes against most of our armored doctrine." "The doctrine was written before we faced Tigers and Panthers in significant numbers," Harrington pointed out. "We need to adapt." Marshall nodded slowly. "The general might agree with you, especially given today's results. But higher up? I'm not so sure. There's a lot invested in our current approach." "Invested in equipment and doctrine, or invested in careers?" Harrington asked pointedly. Marshall didn't answer directly. "I'll bring your report to the general. In the meantime, you're authorized to continue operating according to your judgment. Just keep producing results like today." After Marshall left, Harrington stepped outside the tent. The rain had finally stopped, and a few stars were visible between breaks in the clouds. He found Michael sitting on the fender of his tank, cleaning a pistol by the light of a shielded lamp. "Division seems impressed," Harrington said, settling beside his son. Michael nodded. "The men are too. Even the skeptics are coming around." He reassembled the pistol with practiced movements. "But we got lucky today. The Germans will adapt." "Yes, they will," Harrington agreed, "which means we'll need to stay one step ahead." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, father and son, commander and captain, united by blood and battle. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Michael finally spoke, "about our first duty being to our men. My grandfather said something similar after the First World War." Harrington smiled faintly. "He did, and his father said it after the Civil War. It's a lesson each generation of soldiers seems to learn anew." Michael holstered his pistol. "The men are calling you the Ghost now because of the way we moved today, striking from unexpected angles." "The Ghost," Harrington repeated, testing the name. "I've been called worse." As they talked, neither man could have anticipated how their innovative approach would soon be tested against the most formidable German armor yet encountered. Nor could they have foreseen how their tactics would evolve into a systematic method of tank hunting that would change the face of armored warfare on the Western Front. For now, they were simply father and son, commander and captain, sharing a rare moment of quiet beneath the stars of Normandy, united by a common purpose and a shared legacy of service. The Ghost of the 33rd Armored Battalion had won his first major engagement, but the real test was yet to come. Chapter 2. Disaster at Villers-Bocage. Dawn broke over Normandy on June 13, 1944, revealing a landscape shrouded in a light mist that clung to the ancient hedgerows. The men of the 33rd Armored Battalion had been on the move since 0400 hours, their Sherman tanks advancing along narrow country roads toward the town of Villers-Bocage. Intelligence reports indicated the town was lightly defended, a potential weak point in the German line that could be exploited to outflank their positions. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Harrington, riding in the command half-track near the middle of the column, felt a growing unease. The battalion was not operating according to his modified tactics now. Division had issued direct orders: advance rapidly, seize the town, and hold until reinforcements arrived. A textbook armored thrust straight from the manual. He had argued against it during the briefing, pointing out the vulnerability of their tanks in the confined Norman terrain, where visibility was limited and German anti-tank units could easily set up ambush positions. But he had been overruled. The division commander wanted quick results, a breakthrough to demonstrate the effectiveness of American armored doctrine. "Thunder 7 to Thunder 6, his son's voice crackled over the radio. Michael's platoon was at the vanguard of the advance, the tip of the spear. Road clear to checkpoint Charlie, no sign of enemy activity, proceeding to phase line blue. "Acknowledge, Thunder 7, Harrington replied, trying to keep the concern from his voice. "Maintain vigilance. Something doesn't feel right." The column continued its advance, the rumble of engines and the squeak of tank tracks creating a mechanical symphony that echoed through the morning air. Harrington studied his map, noting the terrain features ahead. The road they were following wound through increasingly hilly country, with thick hedgerows on either side that obscured visibility beyond a few dozen yards. Perfect ambush country. He keyed his radio again. "All Thunder elements, increase interval between vehicles. I want 100 yards minimum separation." The order contradicted standard procedure, which called for tanks to maintain tight formation during an advance. But Harrington knew that bunched-up tanks would make for a more devastating ambush if they encountered German armor or anti-tank guns. Some of the tank commanders hesitated, but they complied. The column stretched out, creating more space between vehicles. It would slow their advance somewhat, but it would also reduce their vulnerability to concentrated fire. As they approached the outskirts of Villers-Bocage, the mist began to burn off, revealing a picturesque Norman town nestled among gentle hills. Slate rooftops gleamed in the morning sun, and the spire of a church rose above the surrounding buildings. It looked peaceful, almost idyllic. But Harrington's military instinct, honed by decades of experience, was screaming a warning. He raised his binoculars, scanning the approaches to the town, the surrounding high ground, the tree lines that might conceal German positions. Nothing. Yet the sense of impending danger only increased. "Thunder 6 to all units," he called. "Halt advance. I repeat, halt advance and assume defensive positions." There was a moment of confusion as the order was acknowledged. Then, just as the lead tanks were beginning to maneuver into defensive positions, it happened. A flash from the tree line to the north, followed by the distinctive crack of a high-velocity gun. A moment later, one of the lead Sherman tanks erupted in flames, its turret blown completely off by the force of the internal explosion. "Contact north!" Michael's voice shouted over the radio. "Tiger tank in the tree line." Before Harrington could issue orders, a second Sherman was hit, then a third. The Tiger, hidden among the trees, was methodically destroying the American tanks one by one, its powerful 88mm gun easily penetrating their armor at this range. "All units, reverse and seek cover," Harrington commanded. "Artillery, I need smoke on that tree line now." But it was already too late for many of the lead tanks. The narrow road, bordered by steep embankments and hedgerows, offered few options for maneuver. Tanks attempting to turn around found themselves exposed for critical seconds, presenting their vulnerable side armor to the German gun. Harrington watched in horror as a fourth Sherman was hit, its fuel tanks igniting in a spectacular fireball. Through his binoculars, he could see crew members desperately trying to escape the burning vehicle, their uniforms aflame. "Thunder 7, report status," he called, his heart in his throat. Michael's tank had been among the lead elements. No response. "Thunder 7, this is Thunder 6. Report status immediately." Still nothing. Harrington forced himself to focus on the immediate tactical situation. He ordered the remaining tanks to deploy smoke grenades, creating a visual barrier between themselves and the German position. Under this cover, they began to withdraw, backing down the road they had just advanced along. As the battalion regrouped a safe distance away, the full extent of the disaster became clear. Of the 12 Sherman tanks that had formed the vanguard of the advance, 8 had been destroyed or disabled. Casualty reports were still coming in, but initial estimates suggested at least 20 men killed and a dozen more wounded. And there was still no word from Thunder 7. Harrington organized a recovery team, ordering the battalion's M10 tank destroyers to provide covering fire while a medical half-track advanced to retrieve wounded. He wanted to go himself to search for his son, but he knew his duty was to the entire battalion. Hours passed in a blur of activity. The wounded were evacuated, damaged vehicles recovered where possible, and defensive positions established to prevent any German counterattack. Intelligence officers debriefed survivors, piecing together what had happened. The picture that emerged was grim. The Tiger tank that had initiated the ambush was reportedly commanded by none other than Michael Wittmann, one of Germany's most decorated tank aces. After destroying the American advance guard, Wittmann had proceeded into Villers-Bocage itself, where he had engaged elements of a British armored division that had approached from another direction. In the span of 15 minutes, one Tiger tank had destroyed over a dozen Allied armored vehicles. It was approaching dusk when a scout jeep returned from the forward area with news. They had found Thunder 7, Michael's tank. It had been hit in the turret ring, the shell disabling the vehicle without causing a catastrophic explosion. 3 of the 5 crew members had survived, including Michael, though he had been seriously wounded and evacuated to a field hospital. Harrington felt a wave of conflicting emotions: relief that his son was alive, guilt over the men who had died, and anger at the high command that had ordered this ill-conceived advance against his advice. That night, as the battalion established a defensive perimeter, Harrington secluded himself in the command tent with the after-action reports. He read each one carefully, constructing a detailed picture of the ambush, analyzing what had gone wrong and what, if anything, could have been done differently. The conclusions were stark. The Tiger had engaged from a position where it could target the Sherman's side armor while presenting only its nearly impenetrable frontal armor to return fire. It had maintained strict fire discipline, taking careful aim with each shot rather than firing rapidly, and it had used the terrain masterfully, positioning itself where the Americans had limited options for maneuver or evasion. In short, it had employed exactly the kind of tactics Harrington had been advocating, while the American force had been ordered to advance according to conventional doctrine, with predictably disastrous results. The irony was not lost on him. The following morning, Harrington drove to the field hospital where Michael had been taken. The hospital was set up in what had once been a school, its classrooms now filled with rows of cots occupied by wounded soldiers. The smell of antiseptic barely masked the underlying odors of blood and gangrene. He found Michael in a corner bed, his torso wrapped in bandages, his face pale but conscious. A nurse informed him that his son had suffered shrapnel wounds to his chest and left arm when the Tiger's shell had penetrated their tank, but that he was expected to recover. "Dad," Michael's voice was weak but clear, "we walked right into it, just like you warned." Harrington took a seat beside the bed. "Save your strength, son. We can talk about the tactical situation later." Michael shook his head slightly. "No, this is important. That Tiger, it wasn't just sitting there waiting for us. It was actively hunting, moving from position to position, using the terrain. Butler and Thompson were killed before we even knew what was happening." Harrington nodded grimly. Butler had been Michael's gunner, Thompson his loader. Good men, experienced tankers. "The thing is," Michael continued, "when we finally spotted it, it was already relocating to another position, not charging forward like our doctrine says, but moving laterally, keeping its frontal armor toward us while seeking a better firing angle." "Ambush tactics," Harrington said. "Mobile ambush tactics. Exactly what you'd have been talking about." Michael winced as a wave of pain passed through him. "We never had a chance using conventional approaches. By the time we'd spotted him, he'd already acquired his next target." Harrington sat with his son for another hour, discussing what they had observed and experienced. Despite his injuries, Michael's mind was sharp, his observations detailed and insightful. It was clear that the encounter with the Tiger had profoundly affected his thinking about armored warfare. As he prepared to leave, Harrington squeezed his son's uninjured hand. "Rest and recover. We'll talk more when you're better." Michael's expression turned serious. "Dad, promise me something. Don't let them keep sending our guys out there like this." "Not against those tanks. We need a different approach." Harrington nodded solemnly. I promise. The drive back to the battalion's position gave Harrington time to think. The disaster at Villers-Bocage had cost them dearly, but it had also provided valuable lessons. The effectiveness of the German ambush tactics was undeniable. If the Americans were to counter the superior German tanks, they would need to adopt and adapt those same tactics. Upon returning to headquarters, Harrington found a message waiting for him. He was to report to Division Command immediately. The tone of the message suggested he was in for a difficult meeting. Division headquarters had been established in a commandeered manor house, a few miles behind the front lines. As Harrington entered, he could feel the tension in the air. Several staff officers averted their eyes as he passed, a sign that word of the disaster had spread quickly. General Howard Maxwell, the division commander, was waiting in what had once been the manor's library, now converted into a command center with maps covering the walls and communications equipment set up on antique tables. Maxwell was a career officer, old school in his thinking, with a firm belief in established doctrine and procedures. Colonel Harrington, Maxwell's greeting was formal, his expression stern. I've received the preliminary reports from Villers-Bocage. 8 tanks lost, 23 men killed, 16 wounded. A complete failure of the mission objective. Harrington stood at attention. Yes, sir. We encountered a Tiger tank in a prepared ambush position. Our Sherman tanks were outgunned and outarmored. Maxwell's eyes narrowed. I'm aware of the technical disparities, Colonel. What concerns me is the tactical approach. Your battalion was scattered, operating with excessive vehicle intervals, contrary to standard doctrine. Had your tanks been in proper formation, concentrated firepower might have overcome the enemy advantage. It took all of Harrington's self-control not to respond angrily. The general was suggesting that the very tactic that had saved part of his battalion from destruction was actually responsible for their failure. Sir, with respect, concentration would have made us more vulnerable to the ambush, not less. The Tiger was using the terrain to engage us from positions where we couldn't effectively return fire. Our standard tactics are inadequate against this threat. Maxwell leaned forward. Are you suggesting that our armored doctrine, developed over years by our best military minds, is somehow deficient, Colonel? I'm suggesting it was developed before we encountered tigers and panthers in significant numbers, Harrington replied carefully. The battlefield reality has changed, but our tactics haven't adapted accordingly. The general studied him for a long moment. I understand your son was wounded in the engagement. Yes, sir, he was commanding one of the lead tanks. And I'm told he's expected to recover. That's correct, sir. Maxwell's expression softened slightly. I'm glad to hear it. But I wonder if your concern for your son's safety is clouding your tactical judgment. The implication stung, but Harrington kept his voice level. My concern is for all the men under my command, General. They're being sent against superior German armor without adequate tactical guidance. And you believe you have a better approach? I believe we need to adapt, sir. The Germans are using mobile ambush tactics with their heavy tanks, striking from concealed positions, using terrain to protect their vulnerabilities while exposing ours. We need to do the same, not continue with frontal assaults that play to their strengths. Maxwell was silent for a moment, considering. Finally, he spoke. Colonel Harrington, you have a distinguished service record stretching back to the First World War. Your experience and judgment have value, but I cannot authorize a wholesale abandonment of established doctrine based on one engagement, no matter how costly. Harrington felt a sense of defeat settling over him, but then Maxwell continued. However, I am not blind to the challenges we're facing with these German heavy tanks, so I'm prepared to authorize a limited tactical experiment. Harrington looked up, surprised. Sir, you will form a special detachment within your battalion. 6 tanks, volunteers only. You may develop and implement alternative tactics with this unit, operating semi-independently but coordinating with the main battalion. The results will be carefully monitored and evaluated. It was more than Harrington had dared hope for. Thank you, General. I believe this approach will save American lives and prove more effective against German armor. Maxwell raised a cautionary finger. Understand this, Colonel. You're being given latitude because of your experience and record. But if these experimental tactics fail to produce results, or if they result in higher casualties, the experiment ends immediately, and there may be career implications for you personally. I understand the responsibility, sir. Good. Maxwell stood, indicating the meeting was over. I'll expect regular reports on the detachment's operations and results. Dismissed. As Harrington drove back to his battalion, His mind was already working on the details of this new opportunity. 6 tanks weren't many, but it was enough to develop and test the tactics he'd been advocating. The key would be selecting the right personnel, men who could think creatively and adapt to a fundamentally different approach to armored warfare. Upon reaching the battalion area, he immediately called a meeting of his surviving tank commanders. In the gathering dusk, they assembled in a bombed-out barn that was serving as a temporary headquarters. "Gentlemen," Harrington began, "I've just come from a meeting with General Maxwell. In light of our recent engagement and the challenges we're facing against German heavy tanks, I've been authorized to form a special detachment to develop and implement alternative tactics." He outlined the parameters of the authorization, emphasizing that participation would be voluntary and that the approach would differ significantly from established doctrine. "I won't sugarcoat this," he concluded. "What I'm proposing goes against much of what you've been taught. It will require relearning basic assumptions about tank warfare, and it carries risks, both tactical and professional. I need volunteers who are willing to think differently, to operate by a new set of principles that prioritizes survival and effectiveness over conventional approaches." There was silence as the tank commanders exchanged glances. Then one by one, hands began to rise. By the time all volunteers had identified themselves, Harrington had more than enough to form his experimental detachment. That night, alone in his quarters, Harrington pulled out a sheaf of intelligence reports he had been gathering. Among them was a detailed analysis of a curious German armored vehicle that had been encountered with increasing frequency, the Sturmgeschütz, or Stu-G, assault gun. The Stu-G wasn't a conventional tank. It lacked a turret, mounting its gun directly in the hull. This limitation meant it couldn't rotate its gun 360 degrees like a tank, but it also resulted in a lower profile, making it easier to conceal. German crews had been using these vehicles with remarkable effectiveness, employing ambush tactics to destroy Allied tanks despite the Stu-G's technical limitations. As Harrington studied the reports, a pattern emerged. The most successful German tank killers weren't necessarily the ones with the best equipment, but the ones who used terrain, concealment, and tactical surprise most effectively. The Stu-G crews, operating what was essentially an inferior platform compared to tanks like the Tiger, had nonetheless achieved impressive results through superior tactics. There was a lesson here, one that might help American Sherman crews survive and succeed against technically superior German tanks. If the Stu-G could overcome its limitations through tactical innovation, so could the Sherman. With this insight forming the core of his approach, Harrington began drafting the operational guidelines for what would soon become known throughout the division as the Ghost Detachment. Chapter 3, The Man Who Challenged the System. The field hospital was quieter at night. Most of the doctors and nurses had retired to their quarters, leaving only a skeleton staff to monitor the patients. Captain Michael Harrington lay awake, staring at the canvas ceiling of the hospital tent, his mind replaying the ambush at Villers-Bocage like a film stuck on a continuous loop. He remembered the sudden flash from the tree line, the horrifying sound of the 88mm shell tearing through Butler's tank just ahead of him, the frantic radio calls, the desperate attempts to maneuver in the confined space of the Norman lane, and then the impact as a shell struck his own tank, the searing pain as shrapnel tore into his flesh, the smell of burning metal and cordite. But what haunted him most was not the physical experience of the ambush, but the tactical realization that had come with it. They had been utterly outclassed, not just in terms of equipment, but in tactical approach. The Tiger had operated according to principles that contradicted everything Michael had been taught at the armored school at Fort Knox. A soft footstep interrupted his thoughts. Michael turned his head to see his father entering the tent, a folder tucked under his arm and concern etched on his weathered face. "Can't sleep?" Robert Harrington asked, pulling up a chair beside the bed. Michael managed a weak smile. "Too much thinking. About Villers-Bocage. About everything we were taught versus what actually happened out there." Michael shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandaged wounds. The instructor at Knox would have said that the Tiger, with its heavy armor and powerful gun, should have pressed its advantage, advanced aggressively, but it didn't. It stayed hidden, used terrain, engaged from ambush positions, then relocated before we could effectively counter. Robert nodded. "Mobile ambush tactics, the same approach I've been advocating. And the same approach that got shot down by division," Michael said bitterly. "Not anymore." Robert opened the folder he'd brought, revealing a set of official orders. I've been authorized to form a special detachment. 6 tanks operating semi-independently, developing and testing alternative tactics against German heavy armor. Michael's eyes widen. How did you manage that? General Maxwell may be traditional in his thinking, but he's not blind to the realities we're facing. The disaster at Villers-Bocage made it clear that our current approach isn't working against tigers and panthers. Robert's expression turned serious. I want you to be part of this detachment, Michael, once you're recovered. Michael was silent for a moment, considering. You know what they'll say, that you're just trying to protect your son by keeping him in this special unit. Let them talk. I need experienced officers who understand the problem and are willing to think differently. That's you. Robert leaned forward. Besides, you've faced a tiger and survived. That experience is invaluable. When do you start? Immediately. I'm selecting the crews now, developing the tactical framework. Robert handed his son several pages from the folder. These are intelligence reports on a German vehicle called the Sturmgeschütz, or Stug. It's not technically a tank, more an assault gun mounted on a tank chassis. But German crews have been using them with remarkable effectiveness as tank hunters, despite their limitations. Michael scanned the reports with interest. No turret, so limited gun traverse, but a lower profile, easier to conceal. Exactly. They've turned a technical limitation into a tactical advantage by focusing on ambush and terrain usage rather than direct engagement. Robert tapped the report. There's a lesson here for us. The Sherman may be outclassed by the Tiger in terms of armor and firepower, but with the right tactics, we can still be effective. As they discussed the reports, a medical orderly approached, informing them that visiting hours were over. Robert gathered his papers, promising to return the next day with more information about the forming detachment. After his father left, Michael continued to reflect on what they had discussed. The concept of adapting ambush tactics, of turning the Sherman's greater mobility and lower profile into advantages, rather than trying to match the Tiger's firepower, made intuitive sense. But it would require a fundamental shift in thinking, not just for the crews, but for the entire command structure. In the days that followed, as Michael's wounds began to heal, his father visited regularly, bringing updates on the formation of what was now being called the Ghost Detachment. 6 Sherman tanks had been assigned, along with volunteer crews selected for their experience and adaptability. Training had begun, focusing on terrain usage, concealment techniques, coordinated movement, and precision gunnery. On the 7th day after the ambush, Michael received another visitor. Lieutenant Colonel William Thompson, the division intelligence officer, arrived carrying a leather portfolio and a grim expression. Captain Harrington, Thompson greeted him formally. How are the wounds? Healing, sir. The doctors say I should be fit for limited duty within a week. Thompson nodded, taking a seat. I'm here about Villers-Bocage. Division is conducting a thorough investigation into the incident, and as one of the surviving tank commanders, your insights are valuable. For the next hour, Thompson questioned Michael in detail about the ambush, the Tiger's tactics, the American response, and the overall conduct of the operation. Michael answered candidly, not sparing criticism of the conventional tactics that had led them into the ambush. As the interview concluded, Thompson leaned back, studying Michael with a thoughtful expression. Your assessment aligns with other survivor reports. The Tiger, likely commanded by Whitman, used the terrain masterfully, engaged from concealed positions, and never exposed itself to concentrated fire. He hesitated, then added, Your father has been making similar points about German tactics for some time. He has, Michael confirmed, and the ambush at Villers-Bocage proved him right. Thompson's expression remained neutral. Some at divisions see it differently. They attribute the failure to inadequate reconnaissance, improper formation, and insufficient aggressiveness in the face of enemy fire. Michael felt a surge of anger. With respect, sir, that's nonsense. We could have had perfect reconnaissance, textbook formation, and charged straight at that Tiger, and the result would have been the same. Our 75mm guns can't reliably penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor, even at close range. I'm inclined to agree with you, Captain. Thompson opened his portfolio, removing a classified intelligence report. This was compiled from captured German documents and prisoner interrogations. It details the tactical evolution of their armored forces over the past year, particularly on the Eastern Front. The report made for sobering reading. As the war had progressed and German material resources became strained, their tactical approach had adapted. Heavy tanks like the Tiger were increasingly used not as breakthrough vehicles leading in advance, but as mobile strong points in ambush predators. They would identify key terrain, set up in concealed positions, covering likely enemy approaches, engage decisively, then relocate before effective counter-battery fire could be brought to bear. This matches exactly what we experienced, Michael said as he finished reading. Yes, Thompson agreed, and it contradicts significant portions of our current armored doctrine. The question is whether our command structure is willing to adapt accordingly. Michael studied the intelligence officer. You support my father's approach. Thompson chose his words carefully. I support whatever approach keeps our men alive and achieves our objectives. The evidence suggests that against current German armor, our conventional tactics are suboptimal. After Thompson left, Michael lay back, processing what he had learned. The intelligence report confirmed what he and his father had observed firsthand. But more significant was the implication that others within the division staff were beginning to question the established doctrine, albeit quietly. 3 days later, Michael was released from the hospital for light duty. His wounds were healing well, though he still wore bandages under his uniform and had limited mobility in his left arm. His first act upon release was to visit the training area where the Ghost Detachment was developing its new tactics. He found the detachment operating in a wooded area several miles behind the front lines. 6 Sherman tanks were engaged in what appeared to be an unusual exercise. Instead of moving in formation as doctrine prescribed, they were operating individually, using trees and terrain features for concealment, moving in short bursts from one covered position to another. Robert Harrington spotted his son's jeep and approached, his face lighting up with a combination of paternal concern and professional satisfaction. Michael, good to see you vertical. How's the arm? Stiff but functional, Michael replied, his attention on the exercise. What are they doing? Practicing what I call shoot and scoot tactics. Engage from concealment, then immediately displace to another prepared position before the enemy can effectively return fire. Robert gestured to the tanks. We've been working on reducing the time between spotting a target and firing an accurate shot, then minimizing the time required to relocate. Michael watched as one of the Shermans fired at a target set up to represent a German tank, then immediately reversed into the trees, disappearing from view within seconds. That's not in any manual I've read. No, it isn't. Robert's expression was grimly satisfied. But it's keeping these crews alive when they encounter tigers. We've had 2 engagements since forming the detachment. 4 enemy tanks destroyed, no losses on our side. The news was impressive. Division must be taking notice. They are. General Maxwell visited yesterday. He was skeptical at first, but the results are hard to argue with. Robert led his son toward a camouflage command tent. We're developing a comprehensive new tactical framework, not just individual tank movements, but how an entire platoon can operate using these principles. Inside the tent, Michael found an array of maps, diagrams, and after-action reports. One wall was dedicated to what appeared to be a systematic analysis of German tank tactics, with particular emphasis on the operations of Tiger and Panther units. Another displayed detailed terrain studies of the Norman countryside, identifying features that could be exploited for concealment in ambush positions. This is impressive, Michael said, examining the materials. How are the crews adapting? Better than I expected. There was some resistance initially, especially from commanders trained in the conventional approach. But after our first successful engagement, that resistance evaporated. Robert pointed to a map showing a recent encounter. Here, we engaged a mixed force of Panzer IVs and Panthers. By operating from concealed positions and coordinating our fire, we destroyed 3 enemy tanks without exposing ourselves to effective return fire. As they discussed the detachment's operations, a sergeant entered the tent. Colonel, division on the secure line. General Maxwell requesting to speak with you immediately. Robert excused himself, leaving Michael to continue studying the tactical materials. What he found was a methodical, evidence-based approach to countering German heavy armor. His father had analyzed countless engagement reports, identifying patterns in both successful and unsuccessful encounters. From this analysis emerged a set of principles that contradicted conventional wisdom, but aligned with battlefield reality. When Robert returned, his expression was troubled. What is it? Michael asked. There's been a development, Robert replied, his voice measured. Intelligence reports a significant German armored force moving into our sector. Multiple Tiger and Panther tanks, along with infantry support. They're expected to launch a counterattack within 48 hours. And Division wants the Ghost Detachment involved? Yes and no. Robert's jaw tightened. They want us to participate, but under conventional tactical control integrated with the main battalion. General Maxwell is under pressure from Corps to demonstrate the effectiveness of standard doctrine. Michael understood the implications immediately. They're setting you up to fail. If you operate according to conventional tactics against Tigers, you'll likely suffer heavy casualties, discrediting your alternative approach. That's my assessment as well. Robert began gathering maps and reports, but I have no intention of sacrificing my men to prove a point. What are you going to do? Robert's eyes met his son's. Something that could end my career. I'm going to follow the evidence, not the doctrine. The Ghost Detachment will operate according to our developed tactics, regardless of orders to the contrary. The gravity of this decision was not lost on Michael. His father was risking everything, potentially facing court-martial for insubordination in the face of the enemy. Yet he was doing so because he believed it was the only way to protect his men and accomplish the mission. I want to be part of this, Michael said firmly. Transfer me to the detachment. Robert studied his son for a long moment. You're still recovering. Medically, you shouldn't be in a tank yet. I can serve as your operations officer. I don't need to command a tank to be useful. Michael gestured to the tactical materials around them. This approach makes sense, Dad. It's based on evidence, not outdated theory. I want to help implement it. After a brief hesitation, Robert nodded. All right, I'll arrange the transfer today. But understand what you're signing up for. If this goes poorly, we both could face serious consequences. And if it goes well, we save American lives and demonstrate a more effective approach against German armor. Michael extended his hand. I'm in. As they shook hands, father and son, colonel and captain, both knew they were committing to a course that defied conventional authority, but honored a higher duty, the welfare of their men and the ultimate success of their mission. The next 24 hours were a blur of activity as the Ghost Detachment prepared for the anticipated German counterattack. Additional intelligence reports confirmed the presence of elements from the 2nd SS Panzer Division, including at least 4 Tiger tanks and numerous Panthers and Panzer IVs. Michael, now officially serving as the detachment's operations officer, worked with his father to develop a detailed defensive plan based on their alternative tactical approach. Instead of establishing a fixed defensive line as conventional doctrine prescribed, they identified a network of interlocking ambush positions covering likely German advance roads. Each Sherman tank would have primary, secondary, and tertiary positions, allowing them to engage, relocate, and re-engage throughout the battle. Crucial to this approach was a comprehensive understanding of the terrain. Michael spent hours with aerial reconnaissance photographs, creating detailed maps that highlighted concealment opportunities, fields of fire, and potential movement routes hidden from German observation. By dawn on June 21st, the Ghost Detachment was in position. 6 Sherman tanks, carefully camouflaged and positioned to create interlocking fields of fire, waited in silence for the German advance. Robert Harrington had established his command post in a stone farmhouse with excellent visibility of the anticipated battlefield, while Michael coordinated communications from a nearby half-track equipped with additional radio equipment. At 0730 hours, forward observers reported the first German movements. A reconnaissance element, consisting of armored cars and motorcycle troops, was probing the American lines, seeking weak points and assessing defensive positions. Let them pass, Robert ordered. Our target is the armor behind them. The reconnaissance element moved through the area, passing within 100 yards of concealed Sherman tanks without detecting their presence. An hour later, the main German force began its advance. From his observation position, Robert counted 3 Tiger tanks, 7 Panthers, and numerous Panzer IVs, along with supporting infantry and half-tracks. All Ghost elements, maintain discipline, he transmitted. Engage only when targets enter your designated kill zones. Priority targets are Tigers and Panthers. The German armor advanced confidently, apparently unaware of the ambush awaiting them. As the lead Tiger approached the first kill zone, Robert gave the signal. Ghost 3, you are clear to engage. The Sherman, designated as Ghost 3, fired from its concealed position among a cluster of bombed-out farm buildings. The 76mm high-velocity armor-piercing shell struck the Tiger in the side armor, penetrating and igniting its ammunition stores. The German tank erupted in a spectacular explosion, its turret blown completely off by the force of the internal detonation. Immediately, Ghost 3 reversed into a prepared withdrawal route, disappearing from view before the stunned German force could effectively respond. The remaining German tanks halted, commanders scanning frantically for the source of the attack. As they hesitated, Ghost 5 engaged from another concealed position, targeting a Panther that had turned to face the direction of the first attack. This shell struck the Panther's turret ring, jamming the mechanism and rendering the tank's main gun useless. The German force began to react, tanks moving into defensive positions, but they were operating according to a playbook that the Ghost Detachment had studied and countered. As they attempted to form a defensive perimeter, they exposed themselves to fire from other concealed Sherman tanks. Over the next 2 hours, a deadly game of cat and mouse unfolded across the Norman countryside. The Ghost Detachment executed its mobile ambush tactics with precision, striking from unexpected angles, then disappearing before effective return fire could be brought to bear. The German force, trained in conventional armored warfare, struggled to adapt to an enemy they couldn't fix in place or engage directly. By mid-afternoon, the outcome was clear. The German attack had been repulsed, with 7 armored vehicles destroyed and several more damaged, against the loss of a single Sherman that had been caught repositioning. The Ghost Detachment had demonstrated the effectiveness of its approach in the most convincing way possible against the very enemy it had been designed to counter. As the German forces withdrew, leaving burning tanks scattered across the battlefield, Robert Harrington received an unexpected radio call. General Maxwell himself was en route to the Ghost Detachment's position, accompanied by several staff officers and, most surprisingly, a representative from Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF. Michael, who had been coordinating the detachment's movements throughout the battle, joined his father as they prepared to receive this high-level visitation. Both men were grimy, exhausted, but filled with the quiet satisfaction of vindication. "Whatever happens next," Robert said quietly, "we proved the concept. These tactics work against German heavy armor." "They can't ignore the results," Michael agreed. 7 enemy tanks destroyed, 1 loss on our side. The numbers speak for themselves. As they watched the approaching jeeps carrying General Maxwell and his entourage, both Harringtons knew they stood at a pivotal moment, not just in their own careers, but in the evolution of American armored warfare doctrine. The Ghost Detachment had challenged the system, defied conventional wisdom, and emerged victorious. The future of tank warfare on the Western Front was about to change. General Maxwell stepped out of his jeep, his expression unreadable, as he surveyed the battlefield. The smoldering remains of German tanks dotted the Norman landscape, silent testimony to the effectiveness of the Ghost Detachment's unorthodox tactics. Robert Harrington stood at attention, prepared for either commendation or court-martial. His son Michael, still recovering from his wounds but functioning as the unit's operations officer, stood beside him. Neither man spoke as Maxwell approached, accompanied by a cluster of staff officers and a silver-haired colonel wearing the insignia of SHAEF. "Colonel Harrington," Maxwell began, his tone formal, "I understand you employed unauthorized tactical procedures during today's engagement." "Yes, sir," Harrington replied without hesitation. "I made the determination that the situation required adaptation to ensure mission success and preserve the lives of my men." Maxwell's eyes narrowed slightly, and the results speak for themselves. 7 enemy tanks destroyed, 1 loss on our side. He paused, seeming to measure his next words carefully. Unconventional, but undeniably effective. The SHAEF colonel stepped forward. "Colonel David Montgomery," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Supreme Headquarters has been monitoring reports of German Tiger and Panther deployments across the front. Your detachment's success rate is significant." Harrington shook the offered hand, wondering where this was leading. "Colonel Montgomery is here as part of a tactical assessment team," Maxwell explained. "SHAEF is reevaluating our armored doctrine in light of battlefield experiences with German heavy tanks." Montgomery nodded. "Frankly, Colonel Harrington, your Ghost Detachment has produced the most favorable engagement statistics we've seen against Tigers. I'd like to understand exactly how you accomplished that." For the next hour, Harrington and Michael walked the visiting officers through their tactical approach, explaining the principles of mobile ambush, terrain utilization, and coordinated fire that had guided their operations. They used the battlefield itself as a classroom, showing how each Sherman had been positioned to maximize its advantages while minimizing exposure to the superior German guns. As the tour concluded, Montgomery turned to General Maxwell. I believe Schaefer will be very interested in expanding this program, General. Maxwell nodded, then addressed Harrington. Colonel, I'll be candid. Your methods contradict established doctrine, and under normal circumstances, that would be problematic. However, these are not normal circumstances. He gestured to the destroyed German tanks. Results matter, especially when American lives are at stake. Thank you, sir, Harrington replied cautiously. Don't thank me yet, Maxwell warned. You're being given authorization to expand your detachment to a full company strength, 12 Sherman tanks plus supporting elements. You'll continue to develop and refine these tactics with regular reports to both division and Schaefer. Montgomery added, we'll be sending observers from other Allied armored units, British, Canadian, even Free French. If these methods work consistently, they could be adopted across the Allied forces. The implication was clear. The Ghost Detachment was no longer just an experiment. It was becoming a model, potentially reshaping armored warfare strategy across the entire Western Front. But with that recognition came heightened scrutiny and expectations. We'll need more volunteers, Michael said, as they drove back to their command post after the generals had departed. Good men who can think independently. Robert nodded. And we'll need to formalize our training program. What we've been doing instinctively needs to be codified, taught systematically. Over the next week, as word spread about the Ghost Detachment's success against German armor, volunteers began arriving. Tank commanders and crew members from across the division, men who had faced tigers and panthers and survived, men who recognized that conventional tactics were failing against these new threats. Among the first to arrive was Sergeant John Finnegan, a former deer hunter from the mountains of Pennsylvania. At 35, Finnegan was older than most tankers, with graying temples and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting through rifle sights at distant targets. I hear you folks are teaching Shermans to hunt tigers, he said when he reported to Harrington. Figured you could use someone who knows something about stalking and ambushing. Finnegan had been a gunner on a Sherman that had survived an encounter with a tiger near Carrington. While the rest of his platoon had been destroyed, his tank commander had employed instinctive ambush tactics, using a hedgerow for concealment and targeting the tiger's side armor. It was the only American tank to survive the engagement. We lost our commander in a later action, Finnegan explained. After that, they assigned us a replacement, fresh from the States, all by the book. Got our tank shot out from under us within a week. That's when I heard about what you were doing here. Harrington recognized in Finnegan the exact blend of experience and adaptive thinking the detachment needed. How are you as a tank commander, Sergeant? Never had the chance to find out, sir. But I've been studying, and I know how to keep men alive in hostile territory. That's exactly what we're trying to do here, Harrington replied. Consider yourself assigned to the Ghost Detachment. Report to Captain Harrington for orientation and assignment. As Finnegan left, Robert turned to his operations officer, a thoughtful expression on his face. We need to reorganize our training approach. These men are coming to us with valuable experiences, instincts they've developed in actual combat against German armor. We need to incorporate that knowledge, not just impose our methods. Michael nodded. A collaborative approach. Use what they already know, refine it with what we've learned, develop a comprehensive system. Exactly. Set up debriefing sessions with each new arrival. Have them walk through their encounters with German tanks. What worked, what didn't. We'll build our tactical doctrine from the ground up, based on real combat experiences. This approach proved remarkably effective. As more volunteers joined the detachment, a collective wisdom began to emerge, a synthesis of battlefield lessons learned at terrible cost. Men who had survived encounters with German heavy tanks often had developed their own adaptive tactics, improvised in the heat of battle. These innovations, once identified and analyzed, became the building blocks of the Ghost Detachment's evolving methodology. By early July, the detachment had reached its authorized strength of 12 Sherman tanks, organized into 3 platoons of 4 tanks each. Harrington had personally selected the commanders, prioritizing adaptability and independent thinking over seniority or formal qualifications. Among them was Sergeant Finnegan, promoted to staff sergeant and given command of a tank based on his demonstrable aptitude during training exercises. The expanded detachment required a more formalized training program. Michael, now fully recovered from his wounds, took charge of this effort, developing a curriculum that systematically taught the principles of what they were calling predatory tank warfare. The name was Finnegan's suggestion, drawing on his hunting background. Tigers and panthers are apex predators, he had explained during a planning session. Biggest guns, thickest armor. But in nature, apex predators still get taken down by smaller, smarter hunters working together. It's all about using terrain, patience, coordination. The training program incorporated these principles, with heavy emphasis on practical exercises rather than classroom instruction. Sherman crews learned to identify ideal ambush positions, to use natural and artificial concealment effectively, to coordinate their movements with other tanks without exposing themselves to observation. Gunnery training was particularly intensive. Unlike conventional doctrine, which emphasized rapid fire and volume, the Ghost Detachment focused on first-round accuracy at the precise moment when a target was most vulnerable. Gunners spent hours practicing acquiring targets, leading moving vehicles, and aiming for specific weak points in enemy armor. You only get one good shot, Finnegan would tell his gunners. Make it count, then get the hell out before they know what hit them. Communication was another key area of focus. The detachment developed a simplified radio protocol that conveyed maximum information with minimum transmission time, reducing the risk of enemy direction finding. They also established visual signals for situations where radio silence was necessary. As the training program matured, Robert Harrington found himself spending less time with the day-to-day operations and more time dealing with the growing interest from higher commands. SHAEF representatives visited regularly, observing exercises and reviewing engagement reports. Other division commanders sent observers, some skeptical, others keenly interested in adopting similar methods. Not everyone was supportive. Traditional armor officers, particularly those who had helped develop the existing doctrine, viewed the Ghost Detachment with suspicion or outright hostility. They saw its methods as a repudiation of established principles, a challenge to their professional judgment. Colonel James Foster, the Corps armor officer, was among the most vocal critics. A tall, imposing man with a permanent scowl, Foster had written portions of the current Armored Warfare Manual and took personal offense at the suggestion that his approach was flawed. During one particularly tense meeting at division headquarters, Foster confronted Harrington directly. "Your so-called innovations are nothing but glorified defensive tactics," he declared dismissively. "American armor is built on the principle of aggressive advance, concentration of force, and breakthrough. What you're advocating is fundamentally un-American in its approach." Harrington kept his composure. "With respect, Colonel, what I'm advocating is keeping American tankers alive while completing their missions successfully. The battlefield reality has changed. Our tactics need to adapt accordingly." "You're giving our men the wrong message," Foster insisted, "teaching them to hide in ambush rather than advance boldly. It undermines the offensive spirit that makes our armored forces effective." "I'm teaching them to use their advantages against an enemy with superior technology," Harrington countered. "Mobility, coordination, terrain adaptation, these are American virtues too, Colonel." The debate might have continued, but General Maxwell intervened. "Gentlemen, this discussion, while academically interesting, is ultimately settled by results. Colonel Harrington's detachment has the highest kill ratio against German heavy tanks in the entire European theater. That fact cannot be dismissed." Foster wasn't satisfied, but he recognized the futility of continuing the argument. As he departed, he left Harrington with a warning. "This isn't over, Colonel. When these unorthodox tactics fail, as they inevitably will against a determined German advance, the responsibility will be yours alone." Michael, who had accompanied his father to the meeting, watched Foster leave with concern. "He has influence at corps level. He could cause problems for the detachment." "Undoubtedly," Robert agreed, "which means we need to ensure our methods continue to produce results that speak for themselves." Their opportunity to demonstrate those results came sooner than expected. Intelligence reports indicated that elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division were regrouping for another offensive, aiming to counterattack Allied advances near the strategic crossroads town of St. Lo. General Maxwell summoned Harrington to his headquarters, where maps of the area were spread across a large table. "The Germans are concentrating armor here," he indicated a wooded area south of the town. "Intelligence suggests at least a company of mixed tanks, including several Tigers. They appear to be preparing for a thrust toward this road junction, which would cut off our advance elements." Harrington studied the map, noting the terrain features, potential movement routes, and choke points. "My assessment, General, is that this is ideal territory for our methods." Hedgerows provide natural concealment, the limited road network restricts their movement options, and these elevated positions offer excellent observation points. Maxwell nodded. I'm authorizing the Ghost Detachment to deploy to this area immediately. Your mission is to prevent any German armored breakthrough towards St. Lo. How you accomplish that is at your discretion. Thank you, sir. We'll move out at first light. One more thing, Colonel, Maxwell added. Colonel Foster will be observing this operation as Corps' representative. Try not to get him killed, regardless of the temptation. Harrington allowed himself a small smile. I'll do my best, sir. By dawn the next morning, the Ghost Detachment was moving into position in the rolling countryside south of St. Lo. Michael, now commanding one of the 3 platoons, led his tanks to the western flank, while Finnegan's platoon took up positions covering the central approach. The 3rd platoon, under Lieutenant Wilson, a recent convert to their methods, covered the eastern flank. Robert established his command post in a stone farmhouse with an excellent view of the likely battlefield. From this vantage point, he could coordinate the overall operation while maintaining communications with all 3 platoons. Colonel Foster, as promised, had arrived to observe, his skepticism evident in every aspect of his bearing. Your tanks are too dispersed, Foster commented as he studied their deployment through binoculars. Standard doctrine calls for concentration of force to achieve local superiority. Standard doctrine assumes technological parity, Harrington replied evenly. Against Tigers, concentration just gives them more targets. Our dispersal allows us to engage from multiple angles, targeting their weaker side and rear armor. Foster harumphed but offered no further critique as they waited for the German advance to materialize. The waiting was always the hardest part. Hours passed with no sign of enemy movement. Some crew members dozed at their stations. Others maintained their equipment with the meticulous care of men whose lives depended on its function. Finnegan, drawing on his hunting experience, had his entire platoon camouflage their tanks with local vegetation, breaking up their outlines and making them nearly invisible among the Norman hedgerows. Shortly after noon, a forward observer reported the first German movement. Motorcycle troops and armored reconnaissance vehicles were probing forward, testing the American lines for weaknesses. Behind them came the main force, a company of mixed armor, including 3 Tiger tanks identifiable by their distinctive profiles. All Ghost elements, maintain position, Harrington transmitted. Let the reconnaissance pass through. Our targets are the heavy armor following behind. The German reconnaissance elements moved cautiously through the area, passing within yards of concealed Sherman tanks without detecting their presence. Harrington could sense Foster's grudging approval at the effectiveness of their camouflage and discipline. As the main German force entered the valley, Harrington assessed their formation. The 3 Tigers were spread out across the advance, with Panthers and Panzer IVs between them. Infantry and half-tracks followed close behind, ready to support the armor. Just as we anticipated, Harrington commented, they're advancing in textbook formation, assuming they'll encounter a conventional defense. Foster studied the German deployment. They're well organized. If they encounter your dispersed forces, they could overwhelm each position individually. They could if we engage conventionally, Harrington agreed, but we won't. Watch. He keyed his radio. Ghost elements, execute hunting pattern alpha. Priority targets are the Tigers. Engage only when you have a clear shot at vulnerable armor. What followed was a demonstration of the Ghost Detachment's evolved tactics. Rather than engaging the German force head-on, the American tanks remained concealed, allowing the enemy to advance into a series of overlapping kill zones. When the lead Tiger reached the first zone, Michael's platoon opened fire from concealed positions on the western flank. 2 Sherman tanks fired simultaneously, their shells striking the Tiger's side armor. One bounced off, but the second found a vulnerable spot, penetrating and igniting the German tank's ammunition. The Tiger erupted in a spectacular fireball, its turret blown completely off by the internal explosion. Immediately, the 2 Shermans that had fired reversed into prepared withdrawal routes, disappearing from view before the stunned German force could effectively respond. The remaining German tanks halted, commanders scanning frantically for the source of the attack. As they hesitated, Finnegan's platoon engaged from the north, targeting a Panther that had turned to face the direction of the first attack. Their coordinated fire struck the Panther multiple times, disabling its turret and setting it ablaze. Your men are shooting and running, Foster observed, a note of disapproval in his voice. That's not how we train our tankers. No, Harrington agreed. It's how we keep them alive against superior German armor. Watch what happens next. The German force, now alerted to the threat but unable to locate their attackers, began to deploy into defensive positions. As they did so, they exposed their flanks and rear to Lieutenant Wilson's platoon, which had remained silent until this precise moment. Wilson's tanks opened fire from their concealed positions, destroying a second Tiger and damaging several Panzer IVs. Like the other platoons, they immediately relocated after firing, denying the Germans a fixed target for return fire. The battle continued for over an hour, a deadly game of cat and mouse played across the Norman countryside. The Ghost Detachment executed its mobile ambush tactics with precision, striking from unexpected angles, then disappearing before effective return fire could be brought to bear. The German force, trained in conventional armored warfare, struggled to adapt to an enemy they couldn't fix in place or engage directly. Foster watched in growing amazement as the German company, which should have overwhelmed the American force in a conventional engagement, was systematically dismantled. By mid-afternoon, the outcome was clear. The German attack had been repulsed, with 9 armored vehicles destroyed and several more damaged, against the loss of a single Sherman that had been caught repositioning. "I've never seen anything like it," Foster admitted as the last German tanks withdrew, leaving the battlefield to the Americans. "Your men fight like ghosts, striking and vanishing." "That's why they call us the Ghost Detachment," Harrington replied. "We use what advantages we have, counter their strengths, exploit their weaknesses. It's still American ingenuity, just applied differently." Foster was silent for a long moment, his worldview visibly shifting as he processed what he had witnessed. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you an apology, Colonel Harrington. I was wrong about your methods. What I've seen today is not a repudiation of American armored doctrine, but its evolution in the face of new challenges." Harrington accepted the acknowledgement with a nod. "The Germans forced this adaptation. We're just responding to the reality they created with their Tiger and Panther tanks." "I'll be making a full report to Corps," Foster said, "and I'll be recommending that your methods be studied and, where appropriate, incorporated into our broader tactical approach." It was as close to a complete victory as Harrington could have hoped for. Not just the defeat of the German armored thrust, but the beginning of institutional acceptance for the Ghost Detachment's innovative approach. As Foster departed, Michael joined his father at the observation post. "That went better than expected," he remarked, nodding toward the departing colonel. "Seeing is believing," Robert replied. "All the theoretical arguments in the world can't stand against demonstrated success in actual combat." "The men performed exceptionally," Michael said, "especially Finnegan's platoon. Their camouflage was so effective the Germans drove within 50 yards without spotting them." "He's a natural hunter," Robert agreed. "Speaking of which, where is our mountain man?" "Supervising recovery operations. We're bringing in that disabled Panther for technical analysis. Finnegan thinks there might be armor vulnerabilities we haven't fully exploited yet." Robert smiled. "Always thinking ahead. That's why he's such an asset to this unit." As they discussed this day's events, a messenger arrived with orders from division. General Maxwell was requesting the Ghost Detachment's immediate return to headquarters. No explanation was provided, but the urgency was clear. "What do you think this is about?" Michael asked as they prepared to move out. "Could be anything," Robert replied. "Another mission, perhaps. Or maybe word of our success has reached even higher up the chain of command." They couldn't have anticipated what awaited them at division headquarters. General Maxwell met them personally, his expression grave. "Colonel Harrington, I have news. Your detachment's performance has attracted attention at the highest levels. General Eisenhower himself has taken note." Harrington felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. "I trust that's positive attention, sir?" "Very much so. SHAEF is implementing a new initiative based on your methods. Selected tank units across the Allied forces will be trained in what they're calling mobile ambush tactics. You and your key officers are being temporarily reassigned to help develop the training program." Michael frowned. "Sir, with respect, we're combat officers. Our place is with our men in the field." Maxwell nodded understandingly. "Your dedication is noted, Captain, but consider this. By training other units in your methods, you multiply your impact exponentially. Instead of one detachment hunting German tanks effectively, we could have dozens." Put that way, the reassignment made strategic sense. But Robert sensed there was more to the situation. "And our current detachment, sir? What happens to them while we're developing this training program?" Maxwell hesitated slightly. "They'll continue operations under interim leadership. Colonel Foster has volunteered to oversee the detachment temporarily." Both Harringtons exchanged concerned glances. Despite Foster's recent conversion to their methods, he was still fundamentally a traditionalist. Would he maintain the disciplined independence that had made the ghost detachment effective, or would he gradually revert to conventional doctrine? How long is this reassignment expected to last, sir? Robert asked. 2 weeks, possibly 3, just long enough to establish the core curriculum and train the initial cadre of instructors. Maxwell must have sensed their concern, because he added, I've made it clear to Colonel Foster that the detachment's tactics are to remain unchanged during your absence. He's agreed to follow your established protocols. Neither Harrington was entirely convinced, but they recognized the broader strategic value of spreading their methods throughout the Allied forces. If successful, this initiative could save countless American lives and turn the tide against German heavy armor across the entire Western Front. We'll need to prepare detailed documentation, Michael said as they left the meeting. Every aspect of our approach needs to be captured for the training program. Robert nodded. And we should select a few key NCOs to accompany us, men who truly understand the tactical principles. Finnegan definitely, perhaps Sergeant Davis from Wilson's platoon as well. Over the next 24 hours, they prepared for their temporary reassignment. Robert met with each platoon leader, emphasizing the importance of maintaining their established methods during his absence. Michael compiled the detachment's engagement records, tactical innovations, and training protocols into a comprehensive manual. Finnegan, informed of his inclusion in the training cadre, received the news with characteristic stoicism. Guess if we can't hunt tigers ourselves, teaching others how to do it is the next best thing. On the morning of their departure, Robert addressed the assembled detachment one last time. Men, what we've built here goes beyond a single unit or a set of tactics. It represents an evolution in how American armor fights, adapting to overcome a superior enemy force through intelligence and innovation rather than brute force. While we're gone, you'll be the standard bearers of this approach. Maintain the discipline and creativity that have made you successful. We'll return as soon as possible. As their jeep pulled away, Michael glanced back at the men they were leaving behind. Do you think Foster will actually maintain our methods, or will he revert to type the moment we're gone? Hard to say, Robert replied. He seemed genuinely impressed by what he saw, but old habits die hard. We can only hope that our success has made a lasting impression. Their destination was a newly established tactical development center near Cherbourg, where representatives from various Allied armored units had been assembled to learn the Ghost Detachment's methods. The facility, previously a French military academy, provided both classroom spaces and adequate terrain for practical exercises. Upon arrival, they were met by Colonel Montgomery, the SHAEF representative they had encountered after their first major engagement. Gentlemen, welcome to what we're informally calling Ghost School. You'll be pleased to know that your approach has supporters at the highest levels. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Mornings were devoted to developing the curriculum, afternoons to practical instruction, with the initial group of officers and NCOs who would become the program's first graduates. Evenings were spent refining the tactical manual based on questions and insights that emerged during the day's training. Finnegan proved unexpectedly valuable in this environment. His background as a hunter allowed him to explain complex tactical concepts in simple, relatable terms. Think of a tiger tank like a bear, he would tell the assembled officers. Powerful, well-armored, but with limited visibility and maneuverability. You don't take on a bear head-on. You use the terrain, you stay downwind, you strike at vulnerable points. The training program evolved rapidly, incorporating feedback from experienced combat officers and adapting to different national tactical cultures. The British, with their Cromwell and Churchill tanks, had different capabilities and limitations than American Shermans or French-operated light tanks. The program needed to accommodate these variations while maintaining its core principles. By the end of the second week, the initial cadre was ready for graduation. 24 officers and NCOs from American, British, Canadian, and Free French armored units had absorbed the Ghost Detachment's methodology and were prepared to implement it with their own units. A second class was already assembled, eager to begin training. Colonel Montgomery approached the Harringtons during the graduation ceremony. SHAEF is extremely pleased with the progress here. General Eisenhower has been briefed personally on the program's potential impact. That's gratifying to hear, Robert replied. When can we expect to return to our detachment? They've been under interim leadership for 2 weeks now. Montgomery's expression shifted slightly. Ah, there's been a development in that regard. Your detachment has been engaged in operations near St. Lo. They've been quite active. Something in the colonel's tone raised immediate concern. What kind of operations? Michael asked. And with what results? They've been employed in a more conventional role, Montgomery admitted. Colonel Foster felt that with their enhanced training, they could function effectively in standard armored operations. They've been conducting direct assaults on German defensive positions. Robert felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. Casualties? Montgomery hesitated. Higher than you're accustomed to. 4 tanks lost in the past week, several men killed or wounded. The news hit both Harringtons hard. The Ghost Detachment had lost more tanks and men in 1 week under Foster's command than they had in over a month using their specialized tactics. We need to return immediately, Robert stated flatly, before more men are lost. I understand your concern, Montgomery replied, but there's a complication. Foster has submitted reports indicating that the detachment's performance in conventional operations has been satisfactory. Division is considering whether to maintain their special status or reintegrate them into standard operations. Satisfactory? Michael's voice rose in disbelief. 4 tanks lost is satisfactory? We were destroying German armor with minimal losses using our methods. This is madness. Robert placed a calming hand on his son's shoulder, though he shared the sentiment. Colonel Montgomery, we appreciate the importance of this training program. But the Ghost Detachment was established to develop and implement specialized tactics against German heavy armor. Returning them to conventional operations negates their entire purpose and will result in unnecessary casualties. Montgomery nodded sympathetically. I agree, and so does Schaeff. I've arranged for your immediate return to the front. General Maxwell has been informed of our concerns, but you should be prepared for resistance from Colonel Foster. He's invested in demonstrating that conventional doctrine can be effective with properly trained crews. Even if it costs American lives, Michael asked bitterly. Politics and doctrine are sometimes more powerful motivators than practical results, Montgomery replied, especially for officers who have built their careers around particular approaches. The return journey to the front was tense. Both Harringtons consumed with concern for their men and anger at Foster's apparent abandonment of the tactics that had proven so effective. Finnegan, traveling with them, expressed his feelings more colorfully, his mountain vocabulary expanding to include creative descriptions of Foster's intelligence, parentage, and probable destiny. They arrived at division headquarters late in the evening, immediately requesting a meeting with General Maxwell. The general received them in his office, his expression grave. I've been expecting you, he said as they entered. Colonel Montgomery informed me of your concerns. Sir, with respect, Robert Bushin, the Ghost Detachment was established to develop and implement specialized tactics against German heavy armor. Returning them to conventional operations undermines that mission and endangers our men unnecessarily. Maxwell sighed. I'm aware, Colonel, but Foster has core-level support for his approach. His argument is that with proper training and leadership, American armored doctrine is effective against all German forces, including heavy tanks. The evidence suggests otherwise, sir, Michael interjected. 4 tanks lost in a week versus our previous record of minimal losses while achieving equal or better results. Numbers don't lie, General, Finnegan added, his usual deference to rank somewhat diminished by his concern. We were killing German tanks without getting our boys killed in return. Seems like that ought to be the priority. Maxwell studied the 3 men before him, noting their unified conviction. I tend to agree with you, but this has become a matter of doctrinal debate at core level. Foster is merely the visible face of a broader resistance to your methods from traditional armor officers. What's our recourse, sir? Robert asked. Foster has one more operation planned, Maxwell replied. A coordinated advance towards St. Lo with the Ghost Detachment operating alongside conventional armored units. The results of this operation will likely determine the detachment's future orientation. When is this operation scheduled? Michael asked urgently. Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours. The Harringtons exchanged alarmed glances. They had arrived just in time, but barely. We need to rejoin our unit immediately, sir, Robert said. Whether we can alter the operational plan or not, our men deserve to have their commanders with them. Maxwell nodded. I've already ordered your transportation readied. You should be able to reach the detachment's position by midnight. As for the operational plan, that's more complicated. It has core approval and is integrated with the broader offensive. Major alterations at this point would be challenging. It was diplomatic language for a nearly impossible task, but Robert wasn't deterred. We'll work within the parameters of the plan, sir, but I request operational control of the ghost detachment to be returned to me immediately upon my arrival. Granted, Maxwell said without hesitation. Whatever disagreements exist about doctrine, the detachment remains under your command officially. Foster was always an interim appointment. As they prepared to depart, Maxwell added, Colonel, this may be about more than just tactical approaches. Foster and others of his generation see your methods as a challenge to their professional judgment, their legacy. They're fighting to preserve a doctrine they helped create, one that defined their careers. I understand that, sir, Robert replied, but my primary responsibility is to my men and our mission, not to anyone's professional pride or legacy. The drive to the front lines took several hours, the roads congested with supply trucks and reinforcements moving forward for the next day's offensive. It was well past midnight when they finally reached the Ghost Detachment's position, a small village that had been converted into a temporary base of operations. Colonel Foster was still awake, studying maps in what had once been the village mayor's office. He looked up in surprise as the Harringtons entered, followed by Finnegan. Colonel Harrington, he greeted them stiffly, we weren't expecting you back so soon. Evidently not, Robert replied. I understand you've been employing my detachment in conventional operations, with significant casualties as a result. Foster straightened. 4 tanks lost, yes, but we've achieved all assigned objectives. The men have performed admirably in a standard armored role. That was never the detachment's purpose, Michael pointed out. They were formed specifically to develop and implement specialized tactics against German heavy armor. Tactics which, while occasionally effective, undermine the broader armored doctrine that has served us well throughout this war, Foster countered. I've demonstrated that with proper leadership, these men can function effectively within established parameters. At what cost? Finnegan asked bluntly. How many of our boys didn't come back because you wanted to prove a point, Colonel? Foster flushed. That's insubordination, Sergeant. Staff Sergeant, Finnegan corrected. And it's the truth. Robert intervened before the confrontation could escalate further. General Maxwell has restored operational control of the detachment to me, effective immediately. I'll need a full briefing on tomorrow's operation and the current status of our forces. Foster's expression tightened, but he recognized the authority of the order. The detachment is assigned to spearhead and advance along this axis. He indicated a road on the map leading towards St. Lo. They'll be operating in conjunction with elements of the 2nd Armored Division approaching from the northeast. The objective is to establish a pincer movement to encircle German forces defending the approaches to the city. Robert studied the map, immediately identifying several concerning aspects of the plan. The road the detachment was to advance along ran through open terrain for nearly a mile before entering a wooded area. Any German anti-tank guns or armor in those woods would have clear fields of fire against approaching American tanks. This is a frontal assault across open ground against prepared defensive positions, he observed. Exactly the scenario our tactics were designed to avoid. It's a coordinated offensive with artillery support and air cover, Foster replied. The Germans are on the defensive, withdrawing toward a new line. This is an opportunity to catch them in the open. Or it's an opportunity for them to draw us into a prepared killing zone, Michael countered, pointing to the wooded high ground. That's ideal terrain for concealed anti-tank positions. Foster dismissed the concern with a wave. Intelligence indicates minimal German presence in that sector. They're concentrating their forces closer to the city itself. Robert wasn't convinced, but he recognized that the broader operation was already in motion. Major changes to the plan at this late stage were indeed impossible. However, he could still modify how the Ghost Detachment would execute their portion of the mission. We'll proceed with the operation, he decided, but we'll employ our established tactics within the framework of the plan. The detachment will advance using terrain masking and leapfrog movements, not in the conventional column formation indicated here. Foster frowned. That will slow the advance considerably. Better slow than dead, Finnegan muttered. The objective remains the same, Robert continued, ignoring the interruption. We'll reach the designated phase lines, but we'll do so in a manner consistent with our tactical doctrine. Foster clearly wasn't pleased, but he had no grounds to object. The operation had been assigned to the Ghost Detachment, and Robert was now back in command. How he executed the mission was his prerogative, provided the objectives were met. Very well, Colonel, Foster conceded. I'll inform Corps of the modification to the execution though not the overall plan. The operation commences at X hundred hours regardless. After Foster departed, Robert gathered the detachment's platoon leaders for an emergency briefing. Lieutenant Wilson was present, along with the commanders who had replaced Michael and Finnegan during their absence. The relief on their faces at seeing their original leadership return was evident. "Gentlemen, we have a challenging situation," Robert began. "We're committed to an operation that doesn't align with our established tactics, but we will adapt and overcome as we've always done." He outlined his modified approach to the mission, emphasizing the use of terrain, dispersed formation, and coordinated movement that had become the hallmarks of the Ghost Detachment's success. The platoon leaders, chafing under Foster's reversion to conventional methods, embraced the return to their specialized tactics with enthusiasm. "One more thing," Robert added as the briefing concluded. "Intelligence reports suggesting minimal German presence in the target area are inconsistent with our own reconnaissance and pattern analysis. I want everyone to be prepared for the possibility of encountering significant enemy armor, including tigers and panthers. We'll advance accordingly with maximum caution and readiness." As the platoon leaders departed to brief their crews, Michael approached his father. "You think Foster is wrong about the German dispositions?" "I think he's seeing what he wants to see," Robert replied. "The pattern of German withdrawals we've observed suggests they're more likely to establish defensive positions along that wooded ridge than to pull back all the way to the city. It's perfect tank-killing terrain. So we're heading into an ambush. Potentially, but now we're prepared for that possibility, and we'll advance in a manner that minimizes our vulnerability." Michael nodded. "I'd better get my platoon ready. They've been operating under conventional doctrine for 2 weeks now. We need to get them back into our mindset before morning." As Michael departed, Finnegan joined Robert at the map table. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Always, Finnegan. Foster's gotten some good men killed proving his point. If we'd been here operating our way, they might still be alive." Robert felt the weight of that truth. "I know, and that's something I'll have to live with. But right now, our responsibility is to ensure no more men are lost unnecessarily. Focus on that." Finnegan nodded grimly. "Already on it, sir. I've been thinking about those woods on the ridge. If I was a German tank commander, that's exactly where I'd set up an ambush. Multiple firing positions, good fields of view, easy withdrawal routes." "My assessment as well. How would you approach it?" "Not head-on, that's for damn sure." Finnegan studied the map. "There's a dry creek bed here that provides some cover, and these small ridges could mask movement if we approach from the northwest rather than directly west. It would take longer, but we'd have better options if we encounter heavy resistance." "Plot it out," Robert ordered. "I want alternative approach routes for each platoon, using every scrap of available cover." By dawn, the Ghost Detachment was prepared for the operation, though not in the manner Foster had intended. Instead of forming a conventional column for a rapid advance, the 3 platoons were dispersed across the battlefield, positioned to move forward in coordinated bounds while maintaining mutual support. As first light touched the horizon, Robert surveyed the terrain before them. The open ground leading to the wooded ridge seemed peaceful in the early morning mist, but his instincts, honed by decades of military experience, were screaming a warning. Somewhere in those woods, he was certain, German armor waited in ambush. The fate of the Ghost Detachment, and potentially the lives of many American tankers across the European theater, would be decided in the next few hours. If Foster's conventional approach proved more effective, their specialized tactics would likely be abandoned. If Robert's concerns about a German ambush proved correct, their methods might save not only their own lives, but potentially reshape armored doctrine for the remainder of the war. As the signal flare arced into the dawn sky, indicating the start of the operation, Robert keyed his radio. "All Ghost elements, advance according to plan. Maintain dispersion, use available cover, and remember your training. We hunt as ghosts today." The detachment began its careful advance toward what Robert increasingly believed would be the most critical engagement of their existence. Not just a battle against German tanks, but a fight for the very soul of American armored warfare doctrine. Chapter 5, First Engagement. The morning mist clung to the ground as the Ghost Detachment began its advance. Unlike conventional armored units moving in tight formation along the main road, the 3 platoons proceeded in a dispersed pattern, using every available terrain feature for concealment. Michael's platoon took the center, advancing along a shallow depression that paralleled the road, but offered some protection from direct observation. Finnegan's platoon moved along the left flank, using a series of small orchards and hedgerows to mask their movement. Lieutenant Wilson's platoon covered the right, advancing through a narrow valley that kept them below the German line of sight. Robert Harrington, commanding from a modified half-track equipped with additional radio equipment, positioned himself on a small rise that offered good visibility of the entire sector. Colonel Foster had insisted on accompanying him, ostensibly to observe the operation, but more likely to document any failures of the Ghost Detachment's unorthodox approach. "They're moving too slowly," Foster commented as he observed the advance through binoculars. "At this rate, they'll miss the coordinated link-up with 2nd Armored." "They're moving deliberately," Robert corrected, minimizing exposure while maintaining awareness. "If there are German forces on that ridge, as I suspect, a conventional advance would be suicide." Foster lowered his binoculars. "Your constant focus on German threats is bordering on paranoia, Colonel. Intelligence reports indicate minimal resistance in this sector." "Intelligence reports have been wrong before." Robert kept his tone neutral, but his attention remained fixed on the wooded ridge ahead. Something about its placement, the way it dominated the approaches to St. Lo, convinced him it would be foolish for the Germans not to utilize it for defense. The detachment continued its careful advance, the 3 platoons maintaining communication through brief, coded radio transmissions. Each tank commander had been trained to think independently while operating within the framework of the overall plan, making tactical decisions based on the immediate situation rather than waiting for orders from above. At 06:45 hours, just as the detachment was approaching the edge of the open ground before the wooded ridge, the radio crackled with Finnegan's voice. "Ghost 6, this is Ghost 3. Movement observed at bearing 035, approximately 800 yards. Vehicle signatures consistent with German armor." Robert immediately raised his binoculars, scanning the indicated direction. Through the morning mist, he could just make out the distinctive silhouette of a German tank moving between trees at the edge of the ridge. "All Ghost elements, hold position," he transmitted. "Positive identification of German armor on the objective. Maintain concealment and prepare for coordinated response." Foster had his own binoculars trained on the ridge now. "I see it. Looks like a Panzer IV, possibly a reconnaissance element." "Or bait," Robert replied, "drawing us forward into a prepared killing zone." He studied the situation carefully. If this was indeed an ambush, as he suspected, the Germans would have positioned their heaviest armor, likely Tigers or Panthers, in concealed positions covering the open ground. They would expect the Americans to advance directly toward the spotted tank, exposing themselves to fire from multiple angles. "Ghost 3, can you achieve firing position on the identified vehicle without exposing yourself to the ridgeline?" Robert asked. "Affirmative, Ghost 6, Finnegan replied. "There's a drainage ditch running perpendicular to my position that offers covered approach to within 500 yards. Proceed with caution. Ghost 2, establish overwatch position covering the eastern portion of the ridge. Ghost 4, maintain current position as reserve. All elements report any additional sightings immediately." The coordinated movement began with practiced precision. Finnegan's platoon used the drainage ditch to advance toward a firing position, while Michael's platoon established observation points covering the suspected German positions. Wilson's platoon remained in reserve, ready to respond to developments or exploit any opportunity that presented itself. Foster watched these maneuvers with a mixture of professional interest and skepticism. "This is taking valuable time, Colonel. A conventional assault would have already engaged the enemy, and potentially lost half its strength in the process," Robert replied. "Patience is a weapon, Colonel. We're using it." At 07:02 hours, Finnegan reported his platoon in position. "Ghost 6, we have firing solution on the identified vehicle. Range 480 yards. Requesting permission to engage." Robert considered the situation. Engaging the visible German tank might reveal the detachment's positions, but it would also potentially provoke the Germans into exposing their full deployment. "Ghost 3, you are clear to engage. 2 rounds only, then immediate relocation." "Understood, engaging now." 2 flashes from Finnegan's position were followed by the distant sound of tank guns firing. Through his binoculars, Robert saw 1 shell strike the German tank directly, sending a plume of dark smoke rising into the morning air. The second round impacted nearby, suggesting the target had attempted to move after the first hit. What happened next confirmed his suspicions about a German ambush. Multiple muzzle flashes erupted from concealed positions along the wooded ridge, German tanks and anti-tank guns firing at Finnegan's last known position. But Finnegan's platoon, following the Ghost Detachment's doctrine, had already relocated, leaving the German shells to impact empty ground. All Ghost elements, German positions identified, Robert transmitted, marking the locations of the muzzle flashes on his map. I count at least 5 distinct firing positions along the ridge. Ghost 2, can you confirm vehicle types? Michael's voice came through clearly. Confirm 2 Panthers at the eastern end of the ridge, 1 Tiger in center position, additional vehicles obscured by trees but likely Panzer IVs based on silhouette. It was exactly as Robert had feared. A well-positioned German armored force set up in a classic ambush formation, with heavy tanks covering the likely approaches and lighter vehicles providing support. Had they advanced according to Foster's conventional plan, the detachment would have driven directly into this killing zone with catastrophic results. Foster, to his credit, recognized the reality of the situation. You were right, he admitted. This is a prepared ambush position. A frontal assault would have been disastrous. Now we fight on our terms, not theirs, Robert replied. He keyed his radio again. All Ghost elements execute hunting pattern Delta. Priority targets are the Tiger and Panthers. Coordinate your movements and fire. Avoid fixed positions. Hunting pattern Delta was one of several pre-planned tactical sequences the detachment had developed for specific situations. This particular pattern was designed for engaging a superior enemy force in prepared positions, using coordinated movement and fire from multiple angles to isolate and eliminate targets one by one. The 3 platoons began executing the pattern with synchronized precision. Wilson's platoon, Omnium, which had remained hidden in reserve, now moved to a flanking position that would allow them to target the German tanks' seat armor. Michael's platoon maintained observation while preparing to engage any German vehicles that repositioned in response to Wilson's threat. Finnegan's platoon, having already revealed their presence, conducted a series of false movements designed to draw German attention and fire. The Germans responded predictably, focusing their attention on Finnegan's visible movements while remaining largely unaware of Wilson's flanking maneuver. When Wilson's platoon opened fire from their new position, they achieved complete tactical surprise. 2 German tanks were hit simultaneously, 1 Panther and 1 Panzer IV, both suffering catastrophic damage from shots to their vulnerable side armor. The remaining German tanks began to reorient toward this new threat, exactly as the pattern anticipated. As they turned, they exposed their flanks to Michael's platoon, which had remained silent until this precise moment. 3 more Sherman tanks fired in coordination, striking another Panther and a supporting Panzer IV. They're caught in a crossfire, Foster observed, his professional appreciation of the tactic evident despite his previous skepticism. Unable to present their strongest armor to all threats simultaneously. That's the core principle, Robert confirmed. Never engage where the enemy is strongest. Force them to divide their attention, create vulnerabilities, then exploit those vulnerabilities with coordinated action. The German force, now reduced by nearly half, attempted to withdraw from what had become an untenable position. But the Ghost Detachment, anticipating this response, had positioned tanks to cover likely retreat routes. As the German vehicles emerged from the woods onto more open ground, they found themselves targeted from multiple angles. The Tiger, which had been positioned at the center of the German formation, proved particularly vulnerable once isolated from its supporting vehicles. Unable to bring its powerful gun to bear on all threats simultaneously, it was hit repeatedly by flanking fire from Sherman tanks it could not effectively target in return. By 07:45 hours, the engagement was effectively over. The German ambush force had been neutralized, with 7 armored vehicles destroyed and the remainder in full retreat. The Ghost Detachment had lost 1 tank to mechanical failure and another damaged by enemy fire, but with no crew fatalities. As the detachment regrouped and established security positions around the now secured ridge, Foster approached Robert with a newfound respect evident in his bearing. I've never seen anything like that, he admitted. Your men systematically dismantled a superior German force that had every tactical advantage. It was impressive. It's what they're trained to do, Robert replied simply. Not to fight fair, but to fight smart. To use what advantages we have against an enemy with superior technology. I understand that now. Foster gestured toward the burning German tanks scattered across the battlefield. This result speaks for itself. No amount of theoretical debate can argue against such effectiveness. Robert accepted the implicit concession with a nod. The question now is whether our approach remains limited to this one detachment or whether it influences broader doctrinal development. After what I've witnessed today, I believe the latter is inevitable, Foster said. I'll be making a full report to Corps recommending that your methods be studied and, where appropriate, incorporated into our tactical doctrine. It was a significant victory, not just against the German armored force, but in the ongoing struggle to adapt American armored doctrine to the realities of modern warfare. The Ghost Detachment had proven conclusively that innovative tactics could overcome technological disadvantages, that American ingenuity could counter German engineering. As the morning progressed, the detachment completed its assigned mission, advancing to the designated phase line and establishing contact with elements of the 2nd Armored Division approaching from the northeast. The pincer movement had succeeded in encircling remaining German forces defending the approaches to St. Lo, though not exactly as the original plan had envisioned. By mid-afternoon, reports of the Ghost Detachment's success had reached division headquarters. General Maxwell himself arrived to inspect the battlefield and congratulate the unit personally. Walking among the destroyed German tanks, he turned to Robert with a satisfied expression. 7 German tanks destroyed, including a Tiger and 2 Panthers, with minimal friendly casualties. That's a ratio the entire European theater would envy, Colonel. The men executed their training perfectly, sir, Robert replied. They adapted to the situation and overcame a superior enemy force through coordinated action. Maxwell nodded, then glanced toward Foster, who was examining a disabled Panther with professional interest. And I understand Colonel Foster has had a change of heart regarding your methods. He's seen them demonstrated effectively in actual combat conditions. It's hard to argue with results. Indeed, Maxwell lowered his voice. SHAEF is extremely pleased with the program's development. General Eisenhower has authorized the expansion of the training initiative. More Ghost detachments will be formed across the Allied forces. It was the ultimate validation of what Robert and his men had developed. Their innovative approach, born of necessity and refined through combat experience, would now influence armored warfare throughout the European theater and potentially beyond. As the general departed, Michael joined his father, his expression one of quiet pride. Words spreading among the other units. We're getting requests for information, for training assistance, even for transfers into the detachment. We've struck a chord, Robert agreed. Tankers across the front have been facing the same challenges against German heavy armor. We've provided a viable solution, a way to fight effectively despite the technological disparity. So what happens now, Michael asked. Do we continue as we have been, or does our role change with this broader recognition? It was a question Robert had been pondering himself. The Ghost Detachment had succeeded in its original mission, developing and demonstrating effective tactics against German heavy armor. But there was still a war to be won, and their expertise could contribute in multiple ways. For now, we continue hunting German tanks, he decided. That's what we do best. But we'll also support the training program, share our knowledge, help other units adopt these methods where appropriate. Michael nodded his agreement. The men will be pleased. They've developed a taste for tank hunting. As they discussed future operations, Finnegan approached, his expression uncharacteristically animated. Colonel Captain, you need to see what we found in that disabled Panther. He led them to where several crew members were examining the German tank that had been hit but not completely destroyed. Its turret mechanism was damaged, rendering the main gun inoperable, but the interior was largely intact. We found their tactical manual, Finnegan explained, holding up a weathered booklet covered in German text. And you're not going to believe this. They've been studying us. Inside the manual were detailed observations about American armored tactics, with specific sections dedicated to what the Germans called phantom units that operated using ambush tactics rather than conventional approaches. The manual advised German tank commanders to be wary of dispersed American formations, to avoid predictable movement patterns, and to maintain all-around security rather than focusing solely on the most obvious threats. They've been adapting to our adaptation, Michael observed, scanning the translated portions that one of their German-speaking crew members had provided. This is essentially a counter-Ghost detachment manual, which means we need to evolve again, Robert said, recognizing both the challenge and the opportunity this represented. Stay ahead of their countermeasures, develop new approaches they haven't anticipated. It was the nature of warfare, this constant evolution of tactics and counter-tactics. The Ghost detachment had changed the game once, forcing the Germans to adapt. Now they would need to change it again, maintaining their edge through innovation and flexibility. As word of their success spread throughout the Allied forces, the Ghost Detachment found itself at the center of a tactical revolution. Traditional armored doctrine was being reassessed, incorporating elements of their approach where appropriate. Foster, true to his word, had become an advocate for these changes at the highest levels, arguing that American armor needed to adapt to the realities of the battlefield rather than adhering rigidly to pre-war concepts. For the men of the detachment, however, the focus remained on the immediate mission: hunting German tanks, protecting American lives, contributing to the Allied advance across France, and eventually into Germany itself. They had proven that American ingenuity could overcome German technological superiority, that innovation and adaptability were weapons as powerful as any gun or armor plate. The Ghost Detachment had transformed from an experimental unit into a model for the future of armored warfare. But their most significant challenges, and their greatest contributions to the Allied victory, still lay ahead. December 16, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow fell silently through the pre-dawn darkness, adding another inch to the 6 already blanketing the Belgian countryside. The temperature had dropped well below freezing during the night, causing condensation to form inside the Sherman tanks of the Ghost Detachment, now expanded to a full company of 16 vehicles. The men of the unit had learned to deal with such discomforts, draping blankets over sensitive equipment and rotating crew members through warm-up sessions in the command post tent. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Harrington, recently promoted in recognition of the Ghost Detachment's contributions, stood at the edge of their encampment, gazing into the darkness toward the German lines. Intelligence reports had been contradictory over the past week. Some suggested the Germans were in full retreat, conserving their remaining armor for the defense of the Reich itself. Others hinted at a massive buildup, a concentration of forces for one final desperate offensive. Harrington had learned to trust his instincts after 30 years of military service. Those instincts were screaming a warning now, a sense of impending threat that transcended the routine dangers of wartime deployment. Something was coming, something big. Can't sleep either? The voice belonged to Michael, now a major and executive officer of the expanded Ghost Detachment. He joined his father at the perimeter, offering a steaming cup of coffee. "Too quiet," Robert replied, accepting the cup gratefully. The warmth seeped into his cold, numbed fingers. "The Germans are up to something, I can feel it." Michael nodded, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Finnegan says the same thing, claims it reminds him of the stillness before a storm in the Pennsylvania mountains. All the animals go silent, sensing what's coming before humans can. Finnegan has good instincts, Robert acknowledged. The mountain hunter had proven invaluable over the months since joining the detachment, his natural stalking and ambush skills translating perfectly to armored warfare. Now a lieutenant, Finnegan commanded one of the detachment's 4 platoons with remarkable effectiveness. "I've ordered additional reconnaissance," Michael said. 2-man patrols, staying within our lines but watching for any sign of movement. Listening posts established at half-mile intervals. If the Germans so much as sneeze in our direction, we'll know about it. Robert nodded approval. His son had developed into an exceptional officer, combining tactical creativity with meticulous attention to detail. The Ghost Detachment's methods had been refined through constant iteration, each engagement providing new lessons that were immediately incorporated into their evolving doctrine. "What about our flanks?" Robert asked. 8th Infantry was supposed to relieve 3rd Battalion yesterday, but I haven't seen any movement. Michael's expression tightened slightly. "That's concerning. I checked with Division an hour ago. They claim the relief is still scheduled, just delayed due to weather and road conditions." "Or they've been diverted elsewhere," Robert suggested. "If the Germans are planning something major, our entire front could be in flux." They stood in silence for several minutes, each man lost in his own thoughts, scanning the darkness as if it might yield answers to their unspoken questions. A runner approached, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Colonel Major, radio message from Outpost Charlie. They're hearing vehicle movements to the east. Multiple engines, heavy-tracked vehicles." Robert and Michael exchanged glances. Outpost Charlie was their easternmost listening post, positioned to monitor a secondary road that wound through the dense Ardennes forest. It wasn't a likely avenue for a major advance, which made the reported vehicle movements all the more intriguing. "Tell Lieutenant Parker to dispatch a reconnaissance patrol immediately," Robert ordered. "Full caution, observation only, no engagement unless directly threatened. And alert all platoons. I want 30% manning at all stations, effective immediately. As the runner departed, Michael spoke softly. If it is a major German movement, why come through that particular sector? It's hardly suitable for armored advance. Which might be precisely why they'd choose it, Robert replied. Remember what we've learned about German tactics. They seek the unexpected approach, the path of least anticipation rather than least resistance, just as we do. By 0500 hours, the Ghost Detachment was on full alert. The reconnaissance patrol had confirmed significant German armored movement through the forest east of their position. More concerning, similar reports were coming in from across the front. This wasn't an isolated probing action or limited counterattack. It had all the hallmarks of a major offensive. Division headquarters finally confirmed what was becoming increasingly obvious. The Germans had launched a massive counteroffensive along a 50-mile front, targeting the junction of American and British forces in the Ardennes. The objective appeared to be the port city of Antwerp, a thrust designed to split the Allied armies and potentially force a negotiated peace. Robert gathered his platoon leaders in the command tent, where a large map of the region was illuminated by kerosene lamps. The picture it presented was grim. German armored columns had already broken through multiple American positions, exploiting the thin defensive line and difficult terrain. The Ghost Detachment, positioned near a critical road junction, now found itself directly in the path of what intelligence was identifying as elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division, including the dreaded heavy tank battalion equipped with Tigers and the newer King Tigers. Gentlemen, our situation has changed significantly, Robert began. What we're facing is not a limited engagement, but a full-scale offensive involving multiple German armored divisions. Initial reports suggest they have committed virtually all their remaining armor to this operation. He indicated the map where the known German advances were marked with red arrows. The primary thrust appears directed here, toward Bastogne, which controls several critical road junctions. However, a significant secondary thrust is moving in our direction, likely aiming to secure this alternate route toward Liège. Lieutenant Finnegan studied the map intently. They're coming right at us, sir. Yes, they are. Robert's voice was steady. Division has ordered a general withdrawal to establish a new defensive line along this ridge 10 miles to our west. Most units are already executing that withdrawal. Michael frowned. And our orders, sir? We have been directed to remain in position to delay the German advance for 24 hours, providing time for the new defensive line to be established and reinforced. Robert paused, letting the implications sink in. I'll be blunt. It's a holding action against superior forces. Division believes our specialized tactics make us uniquely suited for this mission. The tent fell silent as the platoon leaders absorbed this information. They were being asked to stand against what might be the largest concentration of German armor they had ever faced, without the prospect of immediate reinforcement or relief. What's our approach, Colonel? Lieutenant Wilson asked. Standard delay tactics? Robert shook his head. Nothing standard about this situation, gentlemen. We're outnumbered and likely outgunned, but we have several advantages. Intimate knowledge of the terrain, our refined ambush tactics, and the element of surprise. The Germans won't be expecting significant resistance this far forward. He outlined his concept of operations. Rather than establishing a fixed defensive line, the Ghost Detachment would employ what he called a mobile defense in depth. The 4 platoons would establish a series of overlapping ambush positions covering all likely German advance routes. Each position would be temporary, designed for a single engagement before the units relocated to subsequent prepared positions. Think of it as a series of layers, Robert explained, each one extracting a price from the enemy before yielding ground in a controlled manner. We don't need to stop them completely, we just need to slow them down sufficiently to meet our 24-hour mandate. Lieutenant Parker, the youngest of the platoon leaders, studied the map with a concerned expression. Sir, these positions are quite dispersed. If the Germans commit their full strength against any single platoon, we could be overwhelmed before support arrives. A valid concern, Robert acknowledged, which is why our communications and coordination must be flawless. Each platoon will maintain at least 2 predetermined escape routes from every position. At the first sign that you're facing overwhelming force, execute an immediate withdrawal to your secondary position. Better to break contact and preserve your force than stand and be destroyed. The briefing continued for another hour, covering communication protocols, ammunition conservation, contingency plans, and the critical timetable. By 0700 hours, as the winter dawn illuminated the snow-covered landscape, the Ghost Detachment was moving into its initial positions, concealed among the rolling hills and dense forests that characterize the Ardennes region. Robert established his command post in a small stone farmhouse near the center of their operational area, providing good communications with all 4 platoons. Michael remained with him, coordinating the overall deployment while monitoring the steadily increasing reports of German advances across the front. First contact expected within 2 hours based on their current rate of advance, Michael noted, marking the latest intelligence on their operations map. Finnegan's platoon will likely encounter them first. Robert nodded. Finnegan's 4 tanks were positioned covering the most direct approach route, concealed among a cluster of abandoned farm buildings on a low ridge. The position offered excellent fields of fire while providing multiple withdrawal routes. "And our other neighbors?" Robert asked, referring to the American units that should have been on their flanks. Michael's expression was grim. "Mostly gone, sir. 3rd Battalion pulled out during the night without notification. We've got elements of a reconnaissance company to our north, but they're preparing to withdraw as well. Our south flank is essentially uncovered." It was concerning news, though not entirely unexpected given the chaotic nature of the developing battle. The Ghost Detachment would be increasingly isolated as other units withdrew to the new defensive line, potentially vulnerable to encirclement if the German advance progressed too quickly. At 0845 hours, the radio crackled with Finnegan's voice. "Ghost 6, this is Ghost 3. German reconnaissance elements entering my sector. 2 armored cars and a platoon of motorcycle troops moving cautiously southeast to northwest." "Ghost 3, maintain position. Allow reconnaissance to pass," Robert ordered. "Our targets are the armored elements following behind." "Understood, Ghost 6, remaining concealed." 30 minutes later, Finnegan reported again. "Ghost 6, main German column approaching. Count 3 Tigers, numerous Panthers and Panzer IVs, plus mechanized infantry. They're advancing in standard combat formation, unaware of our presence." Robert exchanged glances with Michael. This was a significant German force, larger than they had anticipated for this particular approach. "Ghost 3, confirmed count on heavy armor." "Confirmed 3 Tigers leading the column, at least 7 Panthers in support, followed by lighter vehicles and infantry. Total armored strength appears to be at least 15 tanks, possibly more obscured by terrain." It was a force that would have overwhelmed a conventional American armored unit of comparable size to the Ghost Detachment. But they weren't fighting conventionally. Robert made his decision. "Ghost 3, execute ambush plan Epsilon. Focus on lead elements to create blockage on the road. Ghost 2 and Ghost 4, prepare to engage targets of opportunity when 3 initiates. Ghost 5, maintain reserve position and prepare to counter any flanking attempts." Epsilon was among their most aggressive ambush plans, designed to create maximum disruption by targeting lead vehicles to block narrow routes, trapping following vehicles in a kill zone where they could be engaged methodically. It was high risk, but potentially high reward against a column confined to a narrow approach. "Executing Epsilon now," Finnegan confirmed. "All tanks in firing position, targets acquired." The next 90 seconds passed in tense silence. Then the distant sound of tank guns firing echoed across the valley, followed by the distinctive explosions of armor-piercing shells striking their targets. "Ghost 6, initial engagement successful," Finnegan reported, his voice tense but controlled. 2 Tigers neutralized, 1 damaged and immobilized. Road effectively blocked by disabled vehicles. German column is deploying to respond, infantry dismounting, remaining armor attempting to maneuver off-road. It was an excellent start, better than Robert had dared hope. 2 of the fearsome Tigers already eliminated, and the German advance temporarily halted. Now came the critical phase, exploiting the initial disruption before the Germans could organize an effective response. "Ghost 2 and 4, engage at will. Focus on command vehicles and any armor attempting to bypass the disabled Tigers. Ghost 3, commence staged withdrawal to secondary positions." The battle unfolded with the chaotic intensity characteristic of armored warfare. Lieutenant Wilson's platoon engaged from the Germans' right flank, destroying 2 Panthers that were attempting to deploy into firing positions. Lieutenant Parker's platoon struck from longer range, targeting German recovery vehicles attempting to clear the disabled Tigers from the road. The Germans responded with professional discipline, despite the surprise, their remaining tanks seeking cover, while infantry deployed to secure the flanks. A fierce firefight developed as they attempted to locate and neutralize the dispersed American tanks, hitting them from multiple angles. For nearly an hour, the Ghost Detachment maintained the upper hand, striking, relocating, and striking again in the pattern they had perfected over months of operations. The German advance remained stalled, their casualties mounting as they struggled to counter an enemy they could not fix in place or engage directly. But the balance began to shift as German reinforcements arrived, including fresh armor and significant artillery support. The sheer volume of German forces was beginning to overwhelm the Ghost Detachment's capacity to maintain an effective defense in depth. Ghost 6, situation becoming untenable at position Delta, Wilson reported, his transmission partially obscured by the sound of artillery explosions nearby. Heavy German infantry infiltration through the woods to our east. Request permission to withdraw to position Echo. Granted, Ghost 2, execute immediate withdrawal. Robert turned to Michael, his expression concerned. They're probing our flanks systematically, finding the gaps between our positions. Michael nodded grimly. As we expected, question is whether we can maintain coherent defensive coverage as our positions become more compressed. It was the fundamental challenge of their mobile defense strategy. Each withdrawal reduced the overall depth of their defensive zone, eventually reaching a point where they would have insufficient space to maneuver effectively. By noon, all 4 platoons had been forced to withdraw multiple times, yielding ground in a controlled but steady fashion. The Germans had resumed their advance, moving more cautiously now, well aware of the deadly American tanks that might be concealed anywhere in the challenging terrain. Robert studied the situation map, where Michael was tracking both friendly and enemy positions based on radio reports. They had inflicted significant casualties on the German force, destroying or disabling at least 12 armored vehicles, including 2 Tigers and 5 Panthers. But the Ghost Detachment had taken losses as well. 3 Shermans destroyed and 2 more damaged beyond immediate repair. More concerning, the German advance had pushed them back nearly 3 miles, compressing their defensive zone and limiting their maneuver options. At this rate, we'll be forced into our final defensive positions by 1600 hours, Michael observed. That would leave us well short of the 24-hour delay mandate. Robert considered their options, none of them ideal. They could attempt a more determined stand at their current positions, accepting greater risk of losses. They could withdraw immediately to their final defensive line, preserving their remaining strength but yielding ground prematurely. Or they could try something unexpected, something the Germans wouldn't anticipate from a force in their situation. His deliberation was interrupted by an urgent radio call from Lieutenant Finnegan. Ghost 6, new German elements approaching from the southeast. Heavy armor, at least 5 vehicles, possibly Tiger IIs based on silhouette. They appear to be attempting to flank our position, Foxtrot. King Tigers, the most powerful German tanks in existence, with frontal armor virtually impenetrable to standard Sherman guns even at close range. If they succeeded in establishing firing positions overlooking the Ghost Detachment's remaining defensive zone, the American tanks would be dangerously exposed. But the approaching German force presented an opportunity as well as a threat. If they were moving to establish a flanking position, they might be temporarily isolated from the main German advance, vulnerable to a concentrated counterstrike. All Ghost elements, priority update, Robert transmitted. New threat identified southeast of position Foxtrot. We are executing counter move 7. Ghost 3 and 5, consolidate at Rally Point Whiskey immediately. Ghost 2 and 4, maintain current positions and prepare for maximum effort engagement on my signal. Counter move 7 was among the most aggressive maneuvers in the Ghost Detachment's repertoire, essentially reversing the normal ambush paradigm by concentrating force against an isolated enemy element. It was rarely employed because it required temporary abandonment of their dispersed approach, creating vulnerability if the counter move failed. Michael looked up from the map, concern evident in his expression. Counter move 7? That's high risk against King Tigers, sir. High risk, high reward, Robert replied. If we can neutralize this flanking element, we disrupt their entire tactical approach. It buys us the time we need to fulfill our mandate. As Finnegan and Parker's platoons moved to concentrate at the designated rally point, Robert left the command post, transferring operational control temporarily to Michael. He needed to see the situation firsthand to assess the terrain and the German movement patterns before committing to such a decisive maneuver. Taking a jeep, accompanied only by his driver, Robert made his way along concealed routes to a forward observation position near what his men had designated Rally Point Whiskey. From there, using high-powered binoculars, he could observe both the approaching German flanking force and the main German column continuing its advance against Wilson and Parker's delaying positions. What he saw confirmed his assessment. The flanking force, consisting of 5 King Tigers supported by mechanized infantry, was indeed separated from the main German thrust. They were advancing cautiously through a series of wooded ridges, clearly intending to establish firing positions overlooking the American sector. If they succeeded, the Ghost Detachment would be caught in a deadly crossfire between the main German advance and this powerful flanking element. But their cautious advance also made them vulnerable. Moving in single file along a narrow forest track, each massive tank separated from the others by 50 to 100 meters. They presented an opportunity for the kind of sequential engagement the Ghost Detachment had perfected. Robert made his decision. Returning to his Jeep, he contacted Michael via the vehicle's radio. Execute counter move 7, primary approach vector Charlie, sequential engagement starting with Riarmo's vehicle, maximizing Firefly employment. Understood, sir. Counter move 7 is proceeding. Finnegan reports all elements in position within 5 minutes. Fireflies are prepped for maximum effectiveness. The Fireflies were their secret weapon, a small number of modified Sherman tanks equipped with the powerful British 17-pounder anti-tank gun. These tanks, recently integrated into the Ghost Detachment, were specifically designed to counter German heavy armor, their guns capable of penetrating a Tiger's frontal armor at combat ranges. They were few in number but devastatingly effective when employed properly. Robert returned to the command post in time to oversee the execution of Counter Move 7. Finnegan and Parker's platoons had established a perfect ambush position along the German flanking force's line of advance, concealed among the dense trees of the Ardennes forest. The tanks were positioned in pairs, each covering a specific segment of the German approach route, with the precious Fireflies positioned for optimal firing solutions against the formidable King Tigers. At precisely 14:15 hours, Finnegan gave the order to engage. The rearmost King Tiger, isolated from its companions by a bend in the forest track, was struck simultaneously by 2 Fireflies firing from concealed positions less than 300 yards away. Both shells penetrated its side armor, igniting ammunition and fuel in a catastrophic explosion that sent its massive turret cartwheeling through the winter air. Before the remaining German tanks could effectively respond, the Ghost Detachment tanks relocated with practiced efficiency, moving to predetermined secondary firing positions to engage the next target in line. The second King Tiger, now attempting to reverse back down the narrow track, found itself unable to bring its powerful gun to bear on threats it could not properly locate. It too was hit multiple times, disabled though not completely destroyed. The 3 remaining King Tigers attempted to maneuver off the forest track, seeking fighting positions among the trees. But the dense forest that had concealed the American tanks now worked against the massive German vehicles. Their size and weight made rapid movement through the woods nearly impossible, leaving them vulnerable to continued strikes from the more mobile Shermans. Within 20 minutes, the German flanking force had been neutralized. 3 King Tigers destroyed, 2 disabled and abandoned by their crews. The supporting infantry, deprived of their armored protection, withdrew in disorder, clearly unprepared for such a decisive encounter. It was a stunning tactical victory, achieved against one of the most formidable German armored units the Ghost Detachment had ever encountered. But Robert knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The main German advance continued and would soon adjust to compensate for the loss of their flanking element. All Ghost elements, consolidate at Defense Line Zulu, he ordered. Prepare for sustained defensive engagement. Ammunition conservation is now priority. Make every shot count. Defense Line Zulu was their final prepared position, a carefully selected ridge that provided excellent observation of all approach routes while offering multiple covered withdrawal paths if retreat became necessary. If they could hold this position until dawn, they would fulfill their mandate, providing the crucial 24 hours needed for the new American defensive line to be established. By 1600 hours, as winter daylight began to fade, the Ghost Detachment was fully deployed along Defense Line Zulu. Their remaining strength was concerning. Of the original 16 tanks, only 11 remained operational. Ammunition was becoming critical, particularly for the Fireflies, which had expended much of their specialized armor-piercing rounds during the engagement with the King Tigers. The main German advance had temporarily halted approximately 1 mile from their position, clearly reassessing their approach after the destruction of their flanking force. This provided a brief opportunity for the Ghost Detachment to improve their defensive positions, distribute remaining ammunition, and conduct essential maintenance on their vehicles. As Robert made his rounds, checking on each platoon's status and condition, he found the men tired but resolute. They had been in continuous combat operations for over 8 hours, with minimal rest and food. Yet morale remained high, bolstered by their successful elimination of the German flanking force and their clear understanding of the mission's importance. "How are your men holding up, John?" he asked, finding Finnegan supervising the camouflaging of his remaining tanks with fresh-cut pine branches and snow. "Cold, hungry, and mean as hell, sir," Finnegan replied with his characteristic mountain stoicism, "but ready for whatever those Kraut bastards throw at us next." "Ammunition status?" "Tight but manageable. We're down to about 15 rounds per tank for the standard 75s, 8 rounds for each Firefly, focusing on armor piercing for the heavy stuff, high explosive for any infantry that gets ambitious." Robert nodded. "It would have to be sufficient. Any mechanical issues I should know about?" "Number 3 tank has a sticking turret traverse, but Johnson's working on it. Should be operational within 30 minutes. Everything else is functional, if not exactly factory fresh." "Good work, Lieutenant." Robert clasped Finnegan's shoulder briefly. "Your platoon performed exceptionally against those King Tigers. Textbook execution of a high-risk maneuver." Finnegan shrugged slightly. "Just applied the same principles you've been drilling into us, sir. Identify the vulnerable moment, strike with everything you've got, then get the hell out before they can respond effectively." As dusk settled over the Ardennes, transforming the snow-covered landscape into deepening shades of blue and gray, the Germans resumed their advance. Their approach was more cautious now, armor and infantry advancing in mutually supporting elements, using terrain features for cover whenever possible. They had clearly learned from their earlier encounters with the Ghost Detachment, adapting their tactics to counter the American ambush methodology. "They're probing for weak points," Michael observed as they watched the German movement through binoculars. "Testing our coverage, looking for gaps." Robert nodded. "And they'll find them eventually. We don't have enough tanks to maintain a continuous defensive line. When they identify a gap, they'll exploit it aggressively." "So we let them find a gap of our choosing," Michael suggested. "Channel them where we want them, then hit them when they think they've found our vulnerability." It was sound tactical thinking, consistent with the Ghost Detachment's established approach. Robert quickly formulated a plan, deliberately thinning their coverage along a particular sector that appeared to offer the Germans a route into the American rear areas. This sector, apparently vulnerable, was in fact covered by concealed firing positions specifically established for such a contingency. The Germans took the bait. Shortly after full darkness, their infantry began infiltrating through the perceived gap, followed by lighter armored vehicles carefully navigating the difficult terrain. As they pushed deeper into what they believed was the American rear area, they encountered no resistance, further convincing them they had found a weak point in the defensive line. Robert waited patiently, allowing the German penetration to develop fully before springing the trap. When a significant portion of their force had committed to the apparent breakthrough, he gave the order to engage. The night erupted with muzzle flashes as the Ghost Detachment's tanks opened fire from multiple concealed positions. The German force, caught in open ground between prepared American firing positions, suffered catastrophic casualties in the first minutes of the engagement. Their infantry, exposed without adequate cover, were particularly vulnerable to the high explosive rounds employed by the Sherman tanks specifically for this purpose. The Germans attempted to withdraw, but found their most direct escape route blocked by disabled vehicles from the initial barrage. As they sought alternative routes, they exposed themselves to additional fire from American tanks positioned to cover likely withdrawal paths. By 2200 hours, the German penetration had been completely eliminated. Those few enemy soldiers who escaped did so by abandoning their vehicles and fleeing on foot through the dense forest. The Ghost Detachment had inflicted severe casualties while suffering minimal losses themselves. A single tank damaged by a lucky German anti-tank round, but still operational. The remainder of the night passed in a series of smaller engagements as the Germans tested different sectors of the American line, seeking another vulnerability to exploit. Each probe was met with disciplined, coordinated fire, inflicting consistent casualties while preserving American strength through careful ammunition management and position rotation. By dawn on December 17th, the Ghost Detachment remained firmly in control of Defense Line Zulu. They had fulfilled their mandate, holding their position for the crucial 24 hours required for the new American defensive line to be established to their west. More importantly, they had inflicted disproportionate casualties on the German armored force, destroying or disabling more than 20 tanks, including some of the most formidable vehicles in the German arsenal. As first light illuminated the snow-covered battlefield, Robert received new orders from division. They were to execute a fighting withdrawal to the new defensive line, destroying bridges and creating obstacles to further delay the German advance. Their mission would transition from static defense to mobile delay, continuing to extract maximum cost for every mile the Germans advanced. All Ghost elements, prepare for phased withdrawal to Line X-ray, Robert transmitted. Platoons will withdraw sequentially, maintaining covering fire throughout the movement. Demolition teams are en route to assist with obstacle creation. Timeline for initial movement is 0800 hours. As the men prepared for this next phase of operations, Michael joined his father at their observation post overlooking the German positions. Think they'll follow aggressively? Not immediately, Robert replied, studying the enemy deployment through his binoculars. We've bloodied them significantly. They'll advance cautiously at first, concerned about additional ambushes. That gives us time to establish new defensive positions along the withdrawal route. Michael nodded. The men performed exceptionally, sir, beyond what could reasonably be expected under the circumstances. They did, Robert agreed, pride evident in his voice. And they'll continue to do so. This battle is just beginning, but we've demonstrated that even Germany's most powerful armor can be defeated through proper tactics and disciplined execution. Little did either man know that their actions over the past 24 hours would later be recognized as crucial to blunting the northern thrust of what became known as the Battle of the Bulge. The Ghost Detachment's successful delay operation provided essential time for American forces to establish the defensive positions that ultimately contained and then reversed the German offensive. For now, though, their focus remained on the immediate mission, continuing to extract maximum cost for German advances, preserving American lives through superior tactics and adaptation, demonstrating that American ingenuity could overcome German technological advantages. It was a mission they had been perfecting since the Ghost Detachment's formation, and one they would continue to execute throughout the remainder of what would prove to be Germany's last major offensive of the war. As the withdrawal preparations continued, Robert received one final radio transmission from Division Headquarters. Ghost 6, be advised, your actions have been noted at highest levels. General Eisenhower sends personal commendation for exceptional performance against overwhelming enemy force. Reinforcements en route to your new position, ETA 1200 hours. It was gratifying recognition, but Robert knew the real reward was the survival of his men and the successful execution of their mission. The Ghost Detachment had proven its value once again, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the uniquely American virtues of innovation, adaptability, and determined execution in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Chapter 8, 7 Days at L'Église. The Belgian village of L'Église clung to a low ridge overlooking a river valley, its stone buildings dusted with snow that glittered in the weak December sunlight. Under normal circumstances, it might have appeared picturesque, a scene worthy of a holiday postcard. But these were not normal circumstances. For the past 3 days, L'Église had been at the center of one of the most vicious battles of the German Ardennes offensive. Elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division, including the fearsome 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion with its King Tiger tanks, had seized the village during their initial breakthrough. Now, as American forces recovered from the surprise attack and began to counter, L'Église had become a focal point of the German defense, a fortified position anchoring the northern shoulder of their advance. And the Ghost Detachment had been assigned to take it back. Impossible target, Lieutenant Finnegan muttered as he studied the village through binoculars from their concealed observation post. At least 5 King Tigers, numerous other armor, plus infantry in prepared positions. Conventional assault would be suicide. Robert Harrington nodded agreement. After their successful delay operation during the initial German breakthrough, the Ghost Detachment had been reinforced, refitted, and assigned to the counteroffensive, now developing along the northern edge of the German salient. L'Église represented a critical objective. its recapture necessary to threaten the German supply lines and potentially trap significant enemy forces. Conventional assault isn't an option, Robert confirmed, which is precisely why we've been assigned this mission. Division believes our methods offer the best chance of success against such a heavily defended position. Michael, reviewing aerial reconnaissance photographs that had been delivered by courier that morning, looked up with a concerned expression. There's another complication, sir. Belgian civilians. Intelligence estimates at least 60 villagers remain in La Glaise, unable or unwilling to evacuate before the Germans arrived. This news cast a shadow over their planning. The Ghost Detachment's typical approach to such a fortified position would involve coordinated artillery strikes, followed by converging armored assaults from multiple directions. But with civilians present, such tactics would result in unacceptable casualties among the Belgian population. So we need to neutralize a heavily defended position without relying on our most effective supporting fires, Finnegan summarized. While facing the most powerful tanks in the German arsenal, in prepared defensive positions during winter conditions. Anything else to make it interesting, sir? Robert almost smiled at the mountain man's gallows humor. Yes, actually, we have a 72-hour timeline. Third Army needs this position secured by December 24th to support their broader counteroffensive. The assembled officers fell silent, the magnitude of their challenge settling over them like the steady snowfall outside their makeshift headquarters. We need a different approach, Robert finally said. Something the Germans won't anticipate. Something that negates their defensive advantages while playing to our strengths. For the next several hours, the Ghost Detachment's leadership brainstormed potential approaches, each suggestion evaluated against their unique constraints: the need to protect civilians, the timeline requirement, the formidable German defenses, and the winter conditions that limited visibility and mobility. It was Finnegan who ultimately proposed the solution that formed the core of their approach. Drawing on his hunting background, he suggested a strategy not of direct assault, but of systematic isolation and reduction. We hunt them like mountain lions, he explained, sketching a rough diagram on their planning map, not attacking the main lair directly, but cutting off their movement paths, eliminating their hunting grounds, isolating them from resources until they're vulnerable. The concept evolved rapidly, incorporating input from each officer based on their specific expertise and experience. Rather than attempting to capture La Glaise in a single operation, they would conduct a series of coordinated actions over multiple days, each designed to degrade the German defensive capacity in specific cumulative ways. Day 1 would focus on isolating the village, cutting its supply and reinforcement routes without directly engaging the main defensive positions. Day 2 would target German observation posts and artillery positions on the surrounding high ground, degrading their ability to detect and disrupt American movements. Days 3 and 4 would involve systematic reduction of outlying defensive positions, constricting the German perimeter without directly assaulting the village itself. Only after these preparatory phases would they conduct the actual assault on La Glaise, and even then using indirect approaches that minimize civilian risk while exploiting the vulnerabilities they had created through their methodical preparation. It's a hunter's approach, Robert observed as they finalized the plan. Patience, preparation, and precise action at the moment of maximum advantage. And it keeps our people alive, Michael added. Conventional doctrine would have us charging those king tigers head on. This gives us a fighting chance against superior hardware. With the conceptual approach established, they proceeded to detailed tactical planning. Each day's operations were meticulously choreographed with specific assignments for each platoon, coordination measures with supporting units, and detailed contingency plans for likely German responses. By nightfall, Operation Mountain Lion was ready for execution. The Ghost Detachment, reinforced with additional tank companies and infantry support, would begin movement to their initial positions at first light the following day, December 21st, 1944. Day 1 of Operation Mountain Lion dawned clear and bitterly cold, the temperature well below freezing, the ground hard as concrete beneath a fresh layer of snow. The Ghost Detachment moved into position under cover of darkness, establishing a loose cordon around La Glaise at distances beyond effective range of the German tanks defending the village. Phase 1 commenced at precisely 0730 hours, with simultaneous strikes against the 3 primary supply routes connecting La Glaise to the main German forces. These strikes were conducted not by the tanks of the Ghost Detachment, but by specially trained infantry teams equipped with demolition charges, supported by sniper coverage and small unit mortar fire. The approach proved remarkably effective. By mid-morning, all three roads had been rendered temporarily impassable through a combination of demolished bridges, created landslides, and strategically felled trees. German repair teams attempting to clear these obstacles found themselves under precise fire from American snipers, positioned specifically for this purpose. The Germans responded predictably, dispatching reconnaissance units to locate the American positions and assess their strength. These units moved directly into prepared engagement zones, where they faced coordinated fire from concealed tank platoons. By early afternoon, the Germans had lost 6 armored vehicles and an estimated platoon of infantry, while gaining minimal information about the American dispositions. As dusk approached, Robert gathered his platoon leaders for an assessment of the day's operations. Phase 1 objectives achieved, he summarized. L'Église is effectively isolated from ground resupply and reinforcement. German reconnaissance efforts have been repulsed with significant casualties. We've established the outer cordon with minimal losses. Those losses had indeed been minimal. 1 Sherman damaged by a mine but repairable. 2 infantry soldiers wounded by mortar fire but expected to recover. The Germans, by contrast, had expended considerable resources attempting to counter a threat they couldn't properly locate or assess. They're still trying to figure out what we're doing, Michael observed. They expected either a direct assault or standard encirclement. This methodical isolation approach has them confused about our intentions and strength, which is exactly what we want, Robert confirmed. Confusion leads to hesitation. Hesitation leads to vulnerability. Tomorrow we exploit that vulnerability by taking their eyes. Day 2 focused on neutralizing the German observation and fire support positions surrounding L'Église. These positions, established on high ground outside the village, provided the Germans with early warning of American movements and the ability to direct accurate artillery fire against approaching forces. Rather than engaging these positions directly, the Ghost Detachment employed what they called wolf pack tactics. Small, highly mobile teams consisting of a Sherman tank, an infantry squad, and forward artillery observers would conduct rapid strike operations against identified German OPs, engaging briefly but intensively before withdrawing to avoid counter-battery fire. The approach proved devastatingly effective against the relatively static German positions. By midday, 4 of the 6 primary German observation posts had been neutralized, severely degrading their situational awareness and fire direction capability. The Germans attempted to compensate by committing mobile reserves, including 2 King Tigers, to reinforce their remaining observation positions. This response played directly into the Ghost Detachment's planning. As the massive German tanks lumbered along the narrow roads connecting L'Église to the outlying high ground, they encountered prepared ambush positions established specifically in anticipation of this movement. The resulting engagement demonstrated the effectiveness of the Ghost Detachment's evolved tank hunting methodology. The lead King Tiger, navigating a sharp bend in the road, was struck simultaneously by 2 Shermans firing from concealed positions less than 200 yards away. Both shells found vulnerable points in the German tank's side armor, igniting ammunition and killing the crew instantly. The second King Tiger, unable to effectively maneuver on the narrow road, attempted to reverse course. As it did so, it exposed its more vulnerable rear armor to a 3rd Sherman positioned specifically for this contingency. A single well-placed shot penetrated the engine compartment, immobilizing the massive vehicle and forcing its crew to abandon it under continuing American fire. By nightfall on day 2, the Ghost Detachment had effectively blinded the German defenders of L'Église. Their observation capabilities severely degraded, their ability to direct accurate defensive fires compromised, and 2 of their most formidable armored vehicles neutralized. Yet the most difficult phases of Operation Mountain Lion still lay ahead. The Germans, recognizing their increasingly vulnerable position, had consolidated their remaining forces within L'Église itself, transforming the village into a veritable fortress. Stone buildings provided excellent cover for infantry, while the remaining tanks were positioned at key intersections, their fields of fire covering all likely avenues of approach. And the civilian population remained caught in this developing battlefield, their presence continuing to constrain the Ghost Detachment's tactical options. Day 3 brought deteriorating weather conditions, with heavy snowfall reducing visibility and further complicating movement. Robert adapted the operational plan accordingly, focusing on methodical reduction of German outposts on the immediate periphery of L'Église rather than attempting to penetrate the village itself. These outposts, typically consisting of an infantry squad supported by a machine gun or anti-tank gun, form the outer defensive ring of the German position. By neutralizing them systematically, the Ghost Detachment would further constrict the German perimeter while gathering critical intelligence on their main defensive arrangements. The operations proceeded deliberately throughout the day, with American infantry supported by tanks methodically clearing each outpost. The Germans contested these actions vigorously, but found themselves at a disadvantage due to their compromised observation and communication capabilities. By evening, the outer defensive ring had been eliminated, allowing the Ghost Detachment to establish new positions within direct fire range of L'Église itself. Day 4 brought a significant development. A Belgian civilian, escaping from L'Église under cover of darkness, reached American lines with crucial information. The German commander had ordered all civilians concentrated in the village church and adjacent school, presumably to use them as human shields against American attacks. This information, while troubling, actually simplified the Ghost Detachment's planning by clearly identifying which structures must be protected during the final assault. The day's operations focused on further constricting the German perimeter while conducting detailed reconnaissance of the village defenses. Small infantry teams operating with tank support probed the German positions, deliberately drawing fire to reveal weapon locations and defensive arrangements. By nightfall, the Ghost Detachment had developed a comprehensive understanding of the German defenses. 3 King Tigers remained operational, positioned at key intersections with interlocking fields of fire. Approximately a company of infantry occupied prepared positions throughout the village, with heavy weapons concentrated in the stone buildings overlooking likely approach routes. Anti-tank guns covered the few remaining avenues suitable for armored advance. It was a formidable defensive position, one that would be extremely costly to assault directly, but the methodical preparation of the previous 4 days had created exploitable vulnerabilities, particularly in terms of German supply status and morale. Intercepted radio transmissions indicated that ammunition was becoming critical for certain weapon systems, particularly the King Tigers with their massive 88mm guns. Fuel was also in short supply, limiting the German tanks' mobility and necessitating careful conservation. Most importantly, the psychological impact of being progressively isolated and constricted was beginning to affect German fighting spirit. Day 5 marked the transition to the final phase of Operation Mountain Lion. Rather than launching a conventional assault, the Ghost Detachment implemented what they called a pressure cooker approach. Using their now intimate knowledge of the German positions, they established firing positions covering every sector of the village. From these positions, they conducted systematic precision fires against identified German strongpoints, deliberately avoiding areas where civilians were concentrated. The approach was calculated to maximize psychological pressure while minimizing actual combat. By demonstrating the ability to strike any position within L'Église at will, while clearly avoiding civilian concentrations, the Ghost Detachment sent a powerful message to the German defenders. Resistance was futile, escape impossible, and continued defense would only result in their complete destruction. Throughout the day, this psychological operation was reinforced by actual demonstrations of precision fire capability. A German machine gun position that had been particularly troublesome was neutralized by a single Sherman round fired from over 1,000 yards away. An officer observed moving between buildings was engaged by a sniper with lethal accuracy. A German vehicle attempting to relocate was destroyed within seconds of movement. By evening, the first cracks in German resistance began to appear. Several small groups of German soldiers attempted to escape from the village under a cover of darkness. Most were captured by the American cordon forces, providing valuable intelligence on conditions within L'Église. The situation within the German perimeter was deteriorating rapidly. Ammunition for crew-served weapons was nearly exhausted. Food and medical supplies were critically low. Perhaps most significantly, the German commander had been killed by a precision artillery strike the previous evening, leaving a leadership vacuum that compromised command and control. Day 6 brought the first formal surrender overture. A German medical officer approached American lines under a white flag, ostensibly to discuss evacuation of wounded, but clearly authorized to explore surrender terms. Robert, consulting with division headquarters, offered standard conditions. All German forces would surrender unconditionally. All civilians would be immediately released, and all booby traps or demolitions would be identified. The German officer returned to L'Église to present these terms. Hours passed with no response, suggesting internal debate among the remaining German leadership. During this period, the Ghost Detachment maintained its pressure tactics, conducting periodic demonstration fires to reinforce the hopelessness of continued resistance. By mid-afternoon, a more substantial German delegation approached American lines. The senior surviving officer, a panzer captain, formally accepted the surrender terms. Beginning at 1600 hours, German soldiers would lay down their arms and move to designated collection points. Civilians would be released immediately. All defensive preparations, including minefields and booby traps, would be identified and marked. As darkness fell on the sixth day of Operation Mountain Lion, the first groups of liberated Belgian civilians began emerging from L'Église, escorted by unarmed German medical personnel, as agreed in the surrender terms. American medical teams and support services were waiting to receive them, providing food, medical attention, and transportation to safe areas. The formal surrender of German combat forces commenced at first light on day 7. In groups of 20, German soldiers marched to the designated collection points, where they were disarmed, searched, and processed by American military police. By mid-morning, over 300 Germans had surrendered, including the crews of the remaining King Tigers. Robert and Michael observed this process from their command post, now established in a farmhouse overlooking L'Église. The village itself, remarkably, had suffered minimal damage despite the intensity of the week-long operation. The Ghost Detachment's precision approach had achieved its objectives while preserving both civilian lives and essential infrastructure. Unconventional problem, unconventional solution, Michael remarked as they watched the surrender proceedings. Conventional doctrine would have had us launch a frontal assault, supported by maximum artillery and air support. The civilian casualties would have been substantial, and our own losses potentially catastrophic. Robert nodded agreement. Sometimes the indirect approach is not just more efficient, but more effective. We neutralized a superior enemy force while minimizing casualties on all sides. That's victory by any definition. The success at L'Église represented more than just a tactical achievement. It demonstrated the evolution of the Ghost Detachment's methodology beyond pure tank versus tank engagements to comprehensive combined arms operations. The integration of infantry, artillery, engineers, and armor into a coherent operational approach had proven devastatingly effective against a determined enemy in prepared positions. As the final German prisoners were processed and transported to rear areas, Robert received new orders from division. The Ghost Detachment would have 24 hours for essential maintenance and resupply, then move south to support the growing American counteroffensive against the German salient. Their success at L'Église had not gone unnoticed at higher echelons, and their unique capabilities were in high demand as the Battle of the Bulge entered its decisive phase. The 7 days at L'Église had cost the Ghost Detachment surprisingly little. 2 Sherman tanks destroyed, another 3 damaged, but repairable. Infantry casualties totaled 14, with 3 killed and 11 wounded. Against this, they had neutralized a reinforced German battalion, including 5 King Tigers and numerous other armored vehicles, while securing a strategically valuable position in liberating the civilian population. It was a testament to the effectiveness of their evolved tactical approach, an approach that emphasized brain over brawn, precision over mass, and adaptation over rigid doctrine. In the broader context of the Ardennes offensive, it represented a microcosm of the American military's growing tactical sophistication and ability to counter superior German technology through innovative operational methods. As the Ghost Detachment prepared for its next mission, Robert took a moment to walk through L'Église. The village was quiet now, its streets empty save for American military police and the occasional civilian returning to check on property. Snow continued to fall gently, beginning to cover the scars of battle. Near the village church, Robert encountered Finnegan supervising the recovery of a damaged Sherman. The mountain hunter turned tank commander acknowledged his superior with a casual salute. "Quite a hunt, sir," Finnegan remarked, gesturing toward the massive King Tiger now sitting abandoned in the village square, its crew long since processed into captivity. "Biggest game we've taken yet." Robert smiled slightly at the hunting metaphor. "Your approach made the difference, Lieutenant. Patience, preparation, and precise action at the moment of maximum advantage. Hunter's wisdom applied to modern warfare." Finnegan shrugged modestly. "Just common sense, sir. No sense charging a bear in its den when you can cut off its food and water until it's weak enough to handle safely. As they spoke, a messenger approached with orders from division. The Ghost Detachment's next target had been identified, a critical road junction near Bastogne, currently held by elements of another SS Panzer division. They would move out at first light the following day. The Battle of the Bulge was far from over. The Ghost Detachment's unique capabilities would be tested repeatedly in the coming weeks as the Allies worked to contain and then reverse the German offensive. But their success at L'Église had established a template, a methodology that balanced tactical effectiveness with civilian protection, technical innovation with fundamental military principles. It was in many ways a distinctly American approach to warfare, pragmatic, adaptive, innovative, and ultimately effective, even against an enemy with technological advantages. The Ghost Detachment had proven that American ingenuity could overcome German engineering, that tactics could trump technology when applied with intelligence and discipline. And in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, as the tide of battle slowly turned against Hitler's last desperate gamble, that lesson would be applied again and again, saving American lives while bringing the war steadily closer to its inevitable conclusion.